He's a member.
Yeah.
He certainly is.
All right. We've heard quite a bit about fake news from the Trump administration and from Republicans whenever there's anyone in the media who has the audacity to criticize anything they're doing. Now, it's interesting that fake news is usually a criticism coming from the right wing when you consider the fact that the Governors Association, the Republican Governors Association, took out a media organization online without disclosing that they were the individuals behind it. So they started publishing under a publication that is 100% Republican propaganda, right? It's run by the Republican Governors Association, but they didn't disclose that to any of the readers until the Associated Press investigated it and found out about it. So let me give you some examples of that. So the name of the publication is not in front of me at the very moment.
It's the Free Telegraph.
There we go, yes, it's the Free Telegraph. So the name of the publication is the Free Telegraph, and they have a Facebook page, they have a website, and what they do is they go ahead and publish all sorts of pro-Republican news articles. Now, interestingly enough, it's not just Democrats or liberals that are criticizing them for this, it's also Republicans who say, look, you got to disclose, what the bias is here. You have to disclose that this is, put forward by the GOP Governors Association, and you guys have failed to do that. And so their Facebook page still does not disclose that, but at least at this point, their website does. I'll give you a little bit more of the specific criticism in just a second, but what do you think?
I'm not that bothered by it. It doesn't really, I love, I know Rick Tyler, who's a Republican spokesperson, he's critical of it.
Yes.
But I mean, Fox News is the same thing, right? I mean, it's essentially the same thing. They're telling you a one-sided story about what's going on. These people are trying to dupe you in a way, which is unfortunate. But I think that you have to use your head a little bit when you read this stuff and see where you're getting it and what you're doing. I think people have become lazy, and I'm not that bothered by it. I'm not surprised by it. I'm not that bothered by it. Of all the things that are bothering me today, this is low on that list, though I understand that it's deceptive, and there's a lot about politics that is terribly deceptive.
So I'm bothered by it and extremely bothered by it, and I would feel the same way if it was a group of Democrats doing the same thing, because
journalistically,
yes, because it's intentionally misleading when you don't disclose the organization behind the publication and the political biases that play a role, then you're doing a disservice to readers. It is propaganda. And by the way, that is not just a criticism coming from me or from liberals. As you mentioned, Rick Tyler, who is a Republican communications veteran. I mean, he's worked with Ted Cruz and all sorts of people that we're not fans of. He said it's propaganda for sure, even if they have objective standards and all the reporting is 100% accurate. So again, if it's coming from a particular organization like the GOP Governors Association, then there's obviously a political slant there. And so what they do is they publish all sorts of articles that are very positive toward Republicans, very positive toward what's going on in terms of what lawmakers are doing in Texas right now with Hurricane Harvey response, but they won't do the same thing when it comes to Democratic governors.
Right, because they're the Republican governors. That's what I'm saying. I mean, there's a bit of inherent laziness on the part of the reader that doesn't look into it. And I get what you're saying, and I love Rick Tyler. I really do. I think he's wildly smart, and I respect that he is criticizing this. I just don't. I think in the age of the internet, the age of the internet, so much is unchecked that it falls on the viewer / reader / listener to follow up on what it is that you're taking in.
But if it's not disclosed that it's coming from the GOP Governors Association, how are they going to know? In fact, they didn't even, they didn't take out the URL in the normal way people do, where you can find out who. Who's behind the website. So for instance, they did this by domains by proxy or with domains by proxy, a company that allows the originators of the website to shield their identities. Why did they do that? It was intentionally misleading. And so even if you're like, up on what's going on with fake news and you're very aware of propaganda, I mean, you have to do significant digging to figure out what's going on behind the scenes.
You are going to win this argument. There's no question about it. I'm just not that bothered by it. I think it happens all the time. I think that it's too bad that it happens. It's too bad that people don't look further into it. But I'm not going to fight very hard against it because it still is what you're saying that it is. That's all. I'm just not that bothered by it.
And also, I mean, just spending time on Facebook during the past election. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a certain level of, I don't know if laziness is the right word, but there's a lack of media literacy, right? And it's not, media literacy isn't even a thing that's ever discussed. And so people will come across the most outlandish things on social media and just, take it at face value. And
but I think it's laziness because I think it goes back to the story we were talking about with those 9 senators that Vox did. That there's a laziness on the part of these US senators, obviously, saying, well, I agree with it because it's not Obamacare, right? That's lazy. Well, it's the same thing. If they asked questions and they looked into it and they still believed it, that's different. I believe that Ted Cruz read this legislation and understands it and just despises Obamacare and despises socialized medicine, despises the states taking care of. That's his view. It's why I disagree with him so much. But I do think it's laziness. And I think it's pervasive because of how much information there is to take in that we can't possibly check it all. So this is a loophole that these people are going through. It's like, all right, we can do this and nobody's going to take us to task for it. And in the old days, they wouldn't have been able to get away with it. And now, unfortunately, they are. But I don't, you're not wrong. You're right. It's just, I'm not as bothered.
All right. Well, let us know what you think. Use the hashtag TYTLive to tweet to us. We're going to take one more break. And when we come back, we will discuss what the GOP actually thinks about Trump's proposed border wall. Come right back. Hey guys, welcome back to TYT Live. During the break, I was reading my emails, and I get.
That's weird because for a second I thought you only got one.
I wish.
And I thought you were so
that
unpopular.
Awesome.
Like, Jesus, I can't believe Anna only got one email during the whole last segment.
I get so many press releases from people who just want to tell me what celebrities are wearing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't
get those.
I don't care at all. Like, it's amazing that there's a business for publicists to do that.
No,
like,
I get Congressman Scott Garrett. That's what I think.
Well, at least I'd read that. Whereas it's like, Rihanna was wearing so-and-so. I don't care, don't even care a little bit. Okay, anyway, I do want to talk a little bit about membership and also give you some updates. First off, I know that we usually have Old School on Wednesdays for our members. Unfortunately, Old School is canceled for today, considering that Cenk is out of town. And
it's the Jewish holiday tonight too.
That's the main reason why.
Yeah, Old Shul.
Yes.
That's Old Shul.
Also, Aggressive Progressives, hosted by Jimmy Dore and his wife Steph, will happen tomorrow night, live at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And then there will be a post-game show tonight featuring myself and Brett. So check that out if you're a member. If you're not, you can join by going to tytnetwork.com/join. All right, we ready? Ready for some more stuff?
I think we're ready. Although I should say, we get tweets, and I love when people apologize for disagreeing. Hey, I'm sorry, I got to disagree with you.
No. You don't have to apologize, but I love it when people disagree in a civil way. Whereas,
but of course, disagree with me.
Yeah.
It's like, how boring would it be if everybody agreed with every damn thing you said? Most people do disagree.
Yeah, I mean, disagreements are fine.
Right. Yeah.
It's like
I'm sorry to disagree. Oh, it's okay. I promise.
Yeah.
It's all right.
All right, let's move on to some other news. USA Today conducted a survey featuring lawmakers, Republican lawmakers, and the main question was whether or not they support increased funding to build Trump's border wall. Now, while Trump was campaigning, there were many Republicans who stood by him on that very issue. And now it turns out that the majority of the GOP is not in favor of spending taxpayer money to construct the wall. So let me give you the details. When asked by the USA Today network whether they support the president's initial $1.6 billion budget request to begin construction, only 69 of the 292 Republicans on Capitol Hill said yes. So the House approved $1.6 billion in startup funding as part of a broad national security spending package in July that included 658 billion for the Defense Department and 78 billion for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, the wall funding was tacked onto the bill at the last minute, and the legislation passed the House with the support of only 5 Democrats. Keep in mind that 5 Republicans actually voted against the bill. And so I find this survey so interesting. By the way, there were some lawmakers who refused to answer or just didn't take part in the survey. 3 Republicans said they opposed the money. Several evaded a direct answer, and the rest simply refused to respond to the question. So again, a pretty small number of lawmakers behind funding this border wall.
Right, and anything to get a Republican to the White House. We'll say anything, we'll agree with anything. We will tacitly support anything that this guy's saying when he's running for president, but once it gets there, it's different. And listen, Will Hurd from Texas, from Bahar County, he was from a district that is made up of a lot of Hispanic Americans, and he is somebody who is eyeing leadership. He's somebody who wants to A, win re-election, but B, move up in the House. So he's seeing this and he's understanding. Steve Pierce from New Mexico. These are border states, and these are and Jeff Flake, of course, who is no fan of the president's to begin with. So hearing these voices is, it's, I think, inside what we believe, that nobody really believed that this was a great piece of policy, or by and large did.
Trump's base did, right?
Yeah, the people, the Republicans that went along, these sort of the dyed-in-the-wool Republicans who went along with him, the political veterans who went along with him, you never believed that they really believed in him. They just didn't want to have. They wanted to have a Republican in the White House at all costs, and that's what they got.
That's what they got.
Yeah,
right. Well, sort of. I mean.
Well, sort of, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even really think that Trump has a real ideology. I think that he goes back and forth and just is that wild card that we expected him to be. He's incredibly unpredictable, and switching gears just for 1 second to make my point, a lot of Republicans stood behind him because they believe in party politics. That is the priority, right?
Right.
Yeah. And now there are people who are being implicated in this Russia investigation, and they're concerned about that. But here's the thing: I mean, if you are going to put your name behind a presidential candidate, if you are going to take a position as a White House staffer and you know that this individual is shady, then you're going to be involved in shady dealings. You might get investigated if Trump did make some sort of financial deal with the Russians, and the special counsel in this case, or the Pentagon, wants to do this investigation and figure out what's really going on, whether or not there was collusion or obstruction of justice. It's just, there are things in life that are more important than your political identity, right? And what I mean by that is, what are your principles? If your principle is, I'm just going to support every Republican no matter what, well then you don't really stand for anything. Right? You have to stand for actual ideas and stick by that. And if lawmakers abandon you when it comes to those ideas, then you shouldn't continue supporting them. Right. I do. You're 1,000% right, and that's what is lacking in this country and in most countries too. I think. I mean, if you pick a path, you go down that path. But I do think that, listen, these people supported Donald Trump because of Neil Gorsuch. They supported Donald Trump because of Obamacare repeal. So you can, that little silly thing about the wall and those things he'd said about women, forget that. We're going to get Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, and then we're going to get what we want in terms of social conservatism. So there is hypocrisy. That everybody has to swallow a little bit of hypocrisy when you vote for someone for president too, right? I mean, there are things, you voted for Hillary Clinton for president. You weren't wild about her, but no, I was not wild about her at all.
Yeah, no,
but
I know
the RNC for me was a huge wake-up call.
But what I'm saying is that at any time, right? If I'm wild about a candidate, if I can't wait to vote for Hillary Clinton, there are misgivings I have about it all the time. Everyone who I've ever voted for.
No, don't get me wrong. I know that there's no such thing as a perfect candidate, but Trump was never specific about anything. Okay, he was specific about building a border wall and having Mexico pay for it, but when it came to the nitty gritty, like the details of how he would get Mexico to pay for it, he never had an answer. And no Republican really held his feet to the fire when it came to those things.
Totally true. I mean, although you could argue that 16 of them did during the campaign.
Right.
And that went nowhere. And then at a certain point, well, what are we going to do now, right? I mean, but you're right in theory. And nobody could penetrate ironically, the wall of Trump.
Right.
So and that's what happened this last time out.
All right, one final story for you guys before we end the first hour. All right. A state lawmaker is catching some heat after she shared a meme on social media that had gotten another public figure in trouble earlier. Now, the meme in question is the following. It shows people getting run over by a car. It says, "All lives splatter. Nobody cares about your protest. Keep your ass out of the road." Representative Lynn DeSanto thought it was a great idea to post that. In fact, as she posted that meme, she included a caption that said, "I think this is a movement we can all support." What's the movement that you think everyone supports? Running over protesters simply because they're inconveniencing you by blocking the road? That's what you think people support? After someone just got murdered by getting run over by a white supremacist, you think everyone supports that?
Can you imagine if you are related to Heather Heyer and you see all lives splatter? I mean, whoa. And listen, this is beyond PC. This is just,
it's pathetic.
totally
and you're really that disconnected from reality where you see that meme. First of all, you see that meme, and as a public official, as a state lawmaker, you think, yeah, this is great. I'm gonna share it on Facebook.
Right.
Like, this is gonna be great. Okay, lack of judgment, obviously. But then you think, oh yeah, everyone loves this, right? Everyone can get behind this. Running people over, it's great. I mean, how did you get elected into office? You obviously have not done any critical thinking whatsoever. Now, she did end up deleting it, and she released this following statement. "I'm sorry if people took offense to it and perceived my message in any way insinuating support or condoning people being hit by cars. I perceived it differently." Well, what's the other way that you perceived it, and how could it possibly be perceived in a different way? It's a meme showing people getting run over, protesters getting run over. It's pretty straightforward. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea how in the world she perceived it differently. I mean, that's, in a way, that's the worst thing that she said, right? The worst thing that she did is that she's so dim, it seems, as to not understand why people would have perceived it in a way, and to think there's another way to actually perceive something like that. Well, they must not have a lot of protests in Box Elder, South Dakota, but they should protest Lynn DeSanto.
So she was working at a real estate firm, and she has gotten fired from that real estate firm because of what she posted.
Awesome, that's good.
Just think about what you're about to put on social media before you do it. Just take a second. Take a second to really think about the ramifications. And if you support that kind of meme and are so disconnected from reality that you think everyone else supports it, well, you just need to go out and actually talk to some of your constituents, maybe talk to some people and figure out what they really do support. Because I would hope they don't support running people over just for blocking a road.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. No, that's great. I can't believe people sometimes.
I know,
Thanks, everyone.
It's devastating. All right, when we return, Brett Ehrlich and Hassan Piker will join me. We'll have a great show, so stick around. We'll give you great stories and more. Yes, I want to read some TYT Lives before we get to the stories in the rundown. Joseph S., straight to the point, and I actually really love this tweet. It's in regard to the last story that we did about the state lawmaker in South Dakota who shared that all lives splatter meme. He says, "Are you kidding me?" She literally said, "I think we can all get behind this," with a pic of a car running over people. Yeah, I mean, she claimed that she had a different perception of what that meme meant. What more could it possibly mean? I don't know, maybe I'm the dumb one. Maybe I just don't understand. Maybe I have a different interpretation.
It's galaxy brain. You need to be extra woke. It's like the next level of intelligence to understand that these people deserve to die if they're protesting for civil liberties.
It's calculus brain.
Yeah, it's galaxy
Next
brain.
order thinking, stated out stuff.
Yeah,
All right, okay. I guess I don't get it.
You egg
I
me
still don't
on.
know what we're talking about. I just missed the last story.
Oh, I know what it is. It's a representative who shared that very famous meme on the internet, all lives splatter, of a pickup truck running over protesters.
Got it.
Which, by the way, is like legal in 18 states, or not legal, but advanced legislation in 18 states.
Well, there were lawmakers that proposed it,
Yeah.
but luckily at
Not
this
legal.
point, nothing has passed because giving people the ability to murder individuals who are just simply blocking a road and it inconveniences you is not a good idea.
You're a rhino. You're just a rhino if you don't get on board with that legislation. That's what it is. It's real Republicans that want to splatter people that are protesting.
All right. Unfortunately, we have to start off with some pretty devastating news in regard to some of these natural disasters that are happening throughout the world. Let's start off with the earthquake in Mexico. Yesterday, a huge earthquake struck a town near Mexico City, and unfortunately today, the number of individuals who were found dead increased. The last time we reported this story, the death toll was up to 100 people. Now, unfortunately, it has more than doubled to 225 people. Authorities are expected to find more dead bodies as they try to recover bodies from underneath rubble. Now, the 7.1 magnitude quake turned dozens of buildings in central Mexico into dust and debris, killing at least 225 people. It occurred at a depth of 32 miles, which experts consider to be shallow and thus more destructive. So the more shallow it is, the more damage it's likely to cause, the more deaths are likely to result from this earthquake. 25 bodies, 21 of them children, were found in the debris of the Enrique Robsamen School in Mexico City's Coapa district. So there are schools that not only faced a significant amount of damage, but had students in them, meaning that kids died as a result of this earthquake as well. More than 2,000 public schools suffered damage in the quake. And less than 2 weeks ago, a magnitude 8.1 earthquake struck off Mexico's southern coast, killing at least 90 people. Now, the earthquake that struck yesterday happened on the same day. It was the 32nd anniversary of a giant earthquake that struck the same area in 1985. And the fact that this latest earthquake fell on the same day is crazy. And anyone who knows anything about earthquakes, you can't really predict them.
No. However, there is an unintentional, slight positive thing that had happened on this day in particular. And I talked to Jaime and a bunch of people that are on the ground before coming on the show today. And what they were telling me is that every single year, because that earthquake was so devastating, they will have earthquake drills. Yeah. And on that day, right before the earthquake struck, 2 hours before actually, they had already done an earthquake drill. So it was fresh on their minds. So that's the reason why a lot of that damage could have, like human lives were mitigated in some capacity. And another reason why 200 people is a lot of people, of course, and this is devastating. It's terrible. But in comparison to the 32 years ago, the earthquake that happened 32 years ago, where 10,000 people died and also 5,000 people could not be found within the rubble, they say that the numbers are slated to go all the way up to 1,000. But again, because Mexico City's been impacted before, they were ready for it. Obviously, they changed the code and regulation around how these buildings should be built. And the buildings that crumbled and fell were mostly had structural damage from the previous earthquakes and older buildings. And
that just speaks to the importance of regulation. And I'm not talking about over-regulating things, but building regulation to mitigate the potential damage and destruction of natural disasters makes a lot of sense. And when Hurricane Harvey struck, there was quite a bit of criticism in regard to new developments that didn't take regulations into consideration, and as a result, led to more damage that put more people in harm's way.
Right. A lot of that had to do with where they were building.
Right.
In addition to how they were building, but where they were building, a lot of what's necessary in a floodplain is for you to have natural areas where all that water can go. But with an increased housing demand, as the economics of the area boomed, they kind of changed, they shuffled around their priorities, and it ended up putting a lot of concrete down instead of natural waste areas where they could channel all the water. Mexico City is an interesting situation because not only is the shallow depth of this earthquake important because it increases the amount of damage that it creates, but it also increases the likelihood for there to be aftershocks. And you and I kind of spoke about this yesterday. One of the psychological tolls of an earthquake like this, in addition to it just like being you reliving that moment over and over again in your head, is that you have to relive it, albeit a little bit less intensely, in the aftershocks that follow. And if you go on Snapchat, this is actually, these are some flat bottom boats in some of the areas in the canals that have been there for a very long time that you just see. I mean, this is the initial earthquake. Since then, there have been many, many aftershocks. And one place you can actually check that out is Snapchat has this map feature that you can go into, and you can see people updating, and you see both the devastation, but you also really can see people uniting. It was interesting when it happened yesterday. You could see, if you remember the Occupy Wall Street movement, they had, people did that, the people's megaphone, right? In the streets, just to get people to be quiet, everyone was raising their hands. And if everyone had their hands up, you had to be quiet to command the silence for the person who was giving orders on what they needed to do to clear out the rubble.
And also to hear people, and also not to smoke either, because there were gas leaks all over the areas too.
Yeah.
God, it's so terrifying.
And this stuff just happens. You see it in the middle of the day, people who are ready and have seen so much devastation already. You'll see there will be an earthquake, and not only that, people will run out into the streets because you just never know. And especially at this point, it's just like, let's get the hell out of these houses. Because with each additional earthquake, you've seen that there have been additional failures of certain structures, and they've fallen. And it's really, really traumatizing.
Absolutely.
But it seems like people are uniting and coming together.
That's actually interesting though. On a positive note, at least like the Red Cross has even put out a statement that there are too many people in Mexico City that want to help. And what I found out from some people that are on the ground right now is that Xochimilco and Morelos have more need for rescue workers. So a lot of people are shifting their attention over there, but Mexico City currently is overpopulated with the amount of people that are trying to help out.
Right, there were officials who actually said that it's so overpopulated right now and so full of people who are trying to help, which of course they have the best intentions in mind. It's starting to kind of get in the way of professionals trying to respond to this disaster. So, pay close attention. If you are in the area, pay close attention to what the officials are saying, cooperate with them, and lend a helping hand in a way that's beneficial, because Mexico certainly needs it now. All right, but we got to move on to another pretty devastating natural disaster that struck Puerto Rico. Hurricane Maria has completely destroyed power and electricity in Puerto Rico. And at the moment, we don't have a number of fatalities. However, authorities are expecting some deaths as a result of this huge hurricane that has gone from Category 5 to Category 4, back to Category 5 again. And so it's been incredibly destructive. And if you take a look at these photos, you'll get a sense of just how severe the storm was. Now, an official for the governor of Puerto Rico has released a statement saying that in terms of the infrastructure, Puerto Rico will not be the same. This is something of historic proportions, and he also says that it's a total devastation, and they have lost 100% of their power, meaning that it's difficult to communicate with officials there and kind of get an estimate in terms of the damage and whether or not lives were lost. But it's terrible by itself. This natural disaster is bad by itself, but you also have to take the entire context in mind. What Puerto Rico is dealing with in terms of their economic situation, and this just adds insult to injury, and my heart goes out to them. Yeah,
it's devastating. In terms of how quickly, some historical facts about this hurricane in particular, it is the 10th most intense hurricane that has come and hit out of the Atlantic area ever. It is the most intense hurricane to hit. And in terms of intensity, that's a measure of barometric pressure, not necessarily wind speed. When it hit, you'll hear it was a Category 4 when it made landfall, but it was only 2 miles an hour shy of a Category 5. So it had 155-mile-an-hour winds. And it is the most intense hurricane to hit Puerto Rico since before the Great Depression. And the devastation is really untold. And there's people that were told by one of the heads of the infrastructure committees to evacuate or die.
Yeah,
those are the words that they used, and it was absolutely terrifying for these people who, kind of, when you encounter a hurricane, there's two sides of it, and there's the leading edge and the tailing edge. The leading edge hit Puerto Rico head on.
Because they can't send in rescue workers when they have winds of this speed. Yeah. Basically, and that's the reason why they're like either bunker down or get out if you can. The other problem with getting out is that even tourists that were in the area, or even people that were escaping, the other islands in that area from the previous hurricane were basically trapped in Puerto Rico and they could not leave the island.
Yeah. Right, there were tourists that were stuck in hostels, and CNN spoke to a couple of them, and they said, luckily the people running the hostel are taking good care of us, and we feel safe. And there were others who said, the building that we're in feels stable, but what we're really concerned about is the flooding.
Yeah, they said if you're in a floodplain, you will in a flood-prone area, you will die. They said if you're in a wooden house, you will die. It's terrifying, and that may be hyperbole to motivate people to actually move to a safer area. But you were talking about the last hurricane. Did you guys hear about Delta Flight 431?
No, tell me
Delta
about
Flight 431 was the last flight to fly into Puerto Rico to load up passengers to get folks out of Puerto Rico. And there was this aviation blogger who was just kind of paying attention and looked at the aviation map of where all the planes were, and everyone was headed away. And he noticed one is totally just going to Puerto Rico after everyone in their right mind has turned away. And people started following it, and it started to trend a little bit as everyone was like, "Ugh, I see it. There's kind of a band that they might be able to make their way through." And so they go in and they land. I'm getting chills right now talking about it. They land between the two bands and they get in. And from the flight attendants on board, it takes a while to get. And this was like a full-on 737 or equivalent. This is a 3x3 passenger, mid-sized jet. And they got everybody off and on in a time that no one would ever think possible. They shifted the departure to early.
Yes.
Which most people would be like, are you kidding me? They's like, we are leaving early or we're not leaving.
Yes.
And they landed, you can track the whole thing online. They got up and you can watch it try to take off into the wind because you have to go into the wind. And you're looking at it that's not fast enough for a plane to take off, but there's so much headwind that it creates the correct pressure for that plane to take off.
Look at you getting all scientific.
Christ. I got goosebumps.
It's nuts. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you see. And this was, some aviation professionals that took their life into their own hands and then also placed their lives and the lives of others in the hands of other aviation professionals to execute that. And if you look at it, it was a ridiculous turnaround. But in terms of where this is going, for people who are wondering what's happening next, it's moving on. By Thursday, it should be in Turks and Caicos, southeastern Bahamas. And if you're wondering, it's too early as yet to determine whether it will actually make landfall in the United States. It looks like most models are saying that it stays out. It gains a little more steam once it moves on from where it is right now, and then it starts dissipating as it moves up along the Atlantic coast.
All right, we will keep you updated on that and more. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, the Cornell story that I was telling you about, and we will read your tweets. Use the hashtag TYT Live to communicate with us. We'll see you in just a minute. Hey everyone, welcome back to TYT. A few TYT Lives for you. Lots of commentary about Hassan. So
really,
let's share some of that.
Oh boy.
Your mama says, I think I lost the bet. I had the over 5 number of rings Haas would be wearing.
How many we got? 4, 5, 4.
How do you have the time to put jewelry on? Wait, that's
a ridiculous question.
No, it's not a ridiculous question. Jewelry takes time and energy, and it takes thought. You have to think about it.
Not really. Not if you have the same exact jewelry that you wear all the time, and then you switch it by just taking some off. If you have all of your fingers.
Thought, Hassan.
Brett is not wearing his wedding ring.
Yeah, no, I don't know where it is, but it's in the house somewhere. It's in the house somewhere. I'm new to wearing wedding rings.
How do you not know where it is?
I'll tell you what, I don't know.
You just got married.
The question for Hassan is not how can you find time to put rings on, because multiply 1 second by how many rings he's got on. But
they like that.
The question is, how can you wear rings and not just be like this all the time?
No, it's not weird to me at all.
I hate it. I can't. I love her. So we got married. But the symbol of our love,
ring. Yeah.
The one she got me, it's from a gift shop. It's tungsten. It's heavy. So I was always like this.
It's not comfort fit.
So my finger, yeah.
You got to get a comfort fit wedding ring.
I don't know anything about rings, even though I'm wearing the most rings currently.
Well,
okay.
What's
We gotta go. Heiserberg says every time Hassan is on the main show, Ja'Cory and Arthur should be standing behind him, berating him.
That's funny.
That's a reference to a fun Ja'Cory and Arthur episode.
They went out.
Yeah.
New episode called The Audition.
Yes.
My favorite show on TYT. Check it out.
Well,
I'm in this one. Everyone's in this one.
I'm not in it, but I'm personally offended that that's your favorite show.
Why wouldn't it be?
It should be the breakdown.
Okay, first of all, you should say the name of that show at the beginning, because at the end, like I've already clicked off. I was like, oh, this is the breakdown. Now it is.
It's all good. It doesn't matter.
But I don't know. It's too newsy. We do news all day. Jacorian Arthur is a welcomed respite from the horrors of daily life.
True.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, moving on to some of the horrors in society today. A man in Baton Rouge has been arrested for allegedly murdering 2 black men and attempting to murder another black man who lives near his home. Kenneth James Gleason is his name, and luckily he is in custody. And he had been arrested and let go and then rearrested for other crimes right before he got arrested for these alleged murders. And it was because of alleged drug possession, and then he tried to steal a book. This story is crazy, and I'm happy that he's in custody, especially when you consider what his motivations possibly were. Kenneth James Gleason is thought to have fired at 2 men killed last week while inside his car before getting out, standing over them and firing additional shots. It appears to be cold, calculated, planned against people who were unarmed and defenseless. That's according to the East Baton Rouge district attorney. On Monday, September 11th, Moore said, Moore is the district attorney here, Gleason fired 3 shots from a 9mm gun at an occupied home not far from his own. Luckily, no one was hurt in that case. However, following that incident, he did kill 2 people. The first or allegedly kill people. The first known fatal shooting occurred Tuesday, September 12th, when Bruce Cofield was killed. Cofield, a homeless man known to people in the community, was fatally shot late that night. And then 2 days later, police say Donald Smart was found with fatal gunshot wounds. Smart was a popular employee at Louis Cafe, a diner near the Louisiana State University campus. Moore said they were able to link Gleason to the shootings early Tuesday when DNA found on the shell casings matched his own. Authorities also spoke to multiple witnesses who identified the same red car that Gleason owns and drives at the scene of these crimes. And so he hasn't been convicted, but he has been charged. And so we'll see how it plays out. But through this investigation, authorities are trying to, of course, find the motive and figure out whether or not this was racially motivated. And so far, they indicate that they believe that's the case, but they need to prove it, obviously. So they're working on that investigation right now.
What kind of book was he stealing?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, literally my favorite book.
You just made that up?
No,
right?
Seriously, it was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, okay.
What was the rest of that question?
No, the reason why I said is because potentially that could tell you what his idea was. Also, book theft is a very strange thing to be locked up for, but
arrested for.
Still stealing. I don't know. What do we do with this story? This story is a murder story. We hope we don't sit around and wait for the final result, but we keep monitoring it, and if things seem to be getting left behind, we pick up on it. But I look at this as like, this is a terrible, terrible story.
Right.
About someone who keeps getting.
Here's what we do with this story. Yeah. This is what we do with the story, okay? We stop allowing the GOP to intimidate us. And when I say us, I mean so-called progressive lawmakers. We stop allowing them to intimidate us from draining resources in the Department of Homeland Security that are dedicated to investigating and countering right-wing non-Muslim terrorism in the country, because that type of terrorism exists, right? So look, in this case, he attempted to kill a black man and then he successfully murdered 2 black individuals. Is it a coincidence that they're all black? I don't know, it might be, but I doubt it, okay? Dylan Roof specifically went into a black church and murdered black parishioners who, by the way, lovingly invited him in there to pray along with them. Right-wing extremism in the country is a real problem, okay? I'm not saying take the resources away from any type of counterterrorism program looking into or investigating Muslim extremism, but I am saying that, hey, back in 2011, when the GOP intimidated Democrats and convinced them to drain resources from the Department of Homeland Security so there wouldn't be a portion of that organization looking at right-wing extremism, that was a little bit of an issue.
I totally get all those things.
Yeah.
I
So
totally
that's
get
what I
all
do
these
with this
things.
story.
Missing from this story is on arrested suspect's computer is found propaganda related to right-wing extremism. Right now what we have is terrifying person kills black people. I mean, kills people. Like,
well, targets black people specifically.
so essentially there is a process that is going to unfold, which is going to fill in all these blanks. I say we keep an eye on it. I just am waiting for the missing pieces to arise. It's good to point it out now, but like if it turns out, I mean, just from a strategic point of view, those are all my goals, the goals you have laid out. But my strategic point of view, I wait until we find that missing piece that links.
No, I
him
get
to
it.
that.
Look, I get what you're saying because you don't want to jump on a story and start assuming things before there's actual evidence. But it's gotten to a point where we're seeing stories like this pop up in the news more and more often. Heather Heyer gets murdered and run over due to white supremacists in Charlottesville. Dylan Roof murdered those parishioners at that church. I mean, these stories keep coming up and people are losing their lives, and we have lawmakers and a president that has emboldened this type of hatred. And so all I'm saying is, there should be some entity in government that also spends some of our resources investigating extremism, period. Not just a specific type of extremism, but extremism overall, because it's not just Muslims that carry out, acts of terror. And we've seen acts of terror here in the United States.
Like 75%.
That's right.
And
we keep having this, we keep allowing conservatives to totally take control of the conversation, right? And fearmonger, and it's just, I want the government to do what the government's supposed to do, which is keep Americans safe. And unfortunately, that is not what's happening right now.
Rhetorically, why can't I jump to all those conclusions immediately? Because when you look at the example of the president, he jumps to those conclusions immediately without enough evidence.
Not Charlottesville.
Right. Well, he jumps to certain conclusions immediately based on what's most politically expedient for him and his weird, instinctive, sixth sense for pandering to bases. But I don't know. The one side of me says I would like to jump to this conclusion just because you're doing it. The other side of me says I gotta wait because no matter what they're doing, I wanna wait until I have all the facts that back up this. I don't wanna make the conclusion first. So I have a pattern, I see a pattern, I want to fill in all the blanks to prove that pattern to be something that is actually what's happening before I say it is. That's just it. I mean, I see this, it's absolutely devastating and horrible, and I don't want it to happen.
Well, even the Baton Rouge police chief said on Tuesday following Gleason's arrest that the brutal murders last week probably saved lives because the 23-year-old would have probably killed again.
The arresting of this person who did those.
Yeah. So
not the murders, but the arresting of the person after the murders.
Yeah, I'm just saying, in the end of the day, they are aware that this person was potentially targeting black people. I'm not saying that we should jump to that conclusion, but in the end of the day, we should be at least we should feel a little bit safer now that we have at least one psychotic individual off the streets. I guess that's all you can say once you establish that this person is not a race criminal yet.
Yeah, and tie it back to all those goals. I'm completely in support of all those goals.
I would make the argument that
it's
if
just
there was,
this is a. Yeah.
I just think it's interesting that Dylan Roof, just going back to that story, wrote a whole manifesto and was engaged in hateful rhetoric online. And while the government indiscriminately spies on everyone, regardless of what you do, even if there's no probable cause or reasonable suspicion, they just indiscriminately collect our metadata. Maybe they should hone in on people who are, sharing threatening material or hateful material online. Have a little bit of probable cause mixed in there, so you actually target the right people instead of indiscriminately targeting every American.
Yeah, the cynical but probably true thing is, but those people buy a lot of guns. And I'm gonna lobby so that we don't do that thing because I need that person to buy a lot of guns from the gun industry.
And then when that person ends up shooting people indiscriminately or even purposefully targeting black people, then more people will buy guns to protect themselves because they feel unsafe.
It's just, anyway. All right, let's move on to other news. A fraternity at Cornell is indefinitely suspended. In fact, they have self-suspended themselves after one of their frat members was arrested following the beating of a black student. Now, John Greenfield is the name of the student who has been arrested. I'm sorry, Greenwood. John Greenwood was arrested. Police identified a 19-year-old, John Greenwood, as the Cornell student charged with misdemeanor assault after he was arrested. Police did not release a mugshot. Now, the victim in this story said he was trying to get people to leave the front yard of his residence when a group of men yelled expletives and the N-word at him. And then they proceeded to assault him, punch him in the face. He went to the hospital for a possible concussion and a broken nose. Luckily, he did not have a broken nose and he is recovering fine today. But the fact that this happened is ridiculous. Also, the cops are saying that they're exploring all avenues of what led up to the incident itself and what prompted it. Police are also reviewing the evidence that they have against the statutes that they have for a hate crime. So they are treating this as a potential hate crime. We'll see how it goes. But the fraternity that this student was part of originally denied that he had any involvement with them. And then when they realized, oh wait, yeah, he's involved with us, they decided that they would no longer operate on the Cornell campus and that they would now use the building that that fraternity operates from for the students to promote diversity, which I think is a good move on their part.
Yeah, on the campus, the Black Student Union and others occupied Willard Straight Hall, which is of historical significance because in 1969, after a series of incidents, there wasn't a similar gathering of people in that building, and they issued 12 demands to the school. Among those demands were the expulsion of all people involved. In addition, they wanted to permanently ban the Psi Upsilon fraternity, and they wanted to turn it into a cultural center for black students.
Right.
In addition to a lot of other demands that are things that I think a lot of universities can benefit from, things like adding coursework on privilege and power, mental health personnel of color to be hired, in addition to training on identity issues such as race, sex, citizen status, and class.
My question here, aside from all that, is why the police won't release the mugshot of John Greenwood after the arrest once this becomes a national story. And a similar thing happened with Brock Turner as well. Like, why do we have to put up a photo of him in his suit and tie rather than the police mugshot?
I mean, they would do the same thing if it was a black person beating up a white student.
Yeah,
right?
No, they always do that. You're right. It's always very fair and balanced. It's never like a photo of him like holding up a gun from his Instagram from like 7 years ago or anything like that. Like, will they pull his rap sheet, figure out if he's done anything when he was like 12 years old?
Are they going to give him a drug test and figure out whether or not he's using marijuana?
Because it's cocaine. It's a frat on an Ivy League campus. It's cocaine. He's got cocaine in his body.
I'm just saying, like it's just very fair and balanced treatment when it comes to good old boys going to an Ivy League university and a fraternity doing everything right. They're part of the squash team. They could not have, this person could not have been a racist. Like, no. We need to change this idea that people that are wealthy white students can't be freaking racist. Like, it's only people that are poor that are racist. No, this dude is, if he used the N-word and then attack this person, like, this is a hate crime.
Right.
What more do you need? Does he need to write a manifesto as well saying, I hate black people? I think tribalism is a real thing and that black people are inferior to white people and that's why I will punch someone tomorrow night? Like, is that when we will arrest them for a hate crime?
Everything that you said feeding into reasons why they don't show his mugshot and why they show him in a suit and tie, though I want to punch him in the face more because he's in a suit and tie in his like frat photo. Like,
Brett hates people that wear suits and ties.
I do.
He's racist against that.
I'm allergic to suits and ties. But that all feeds into what's going to be the angle, which is like, listen, this kid is not a menace to society, and he just made a mistake. He had an error in judgment. He is a frat. He's in a fraternity. This is a member of another fraternity. It's a Kappa Sig kid, and this is a Psi Upsilon, and everyone's on there's a lot of testosterone going. It was one big mistake. That's what they want to do, but this is a situation where you go rule of law.
Yeah.
If you want rule of law, this is where rule of law says that as soon as you drop the N-word, I don't care if you're, whatever reason you gave for it, but as soon as you did that, it is now a hate crime and you will suffer accordingly. Because the problem is, person in this situation, it is very likely that the squash player from Deerfield, Cornell, and Psi Upsilon has not suffered the kind of consequences that would befall someone in literally any other organization. Now, if you can call it a fraternity on the one hand, it's the same as a gang. It's a group of young men hanging out together. We cannot excuse one while punishing the other disproportionately.
And by the way, I'm not the biggest advocate for draconian punishments, and I might get a lot of hate for saying this, but if we're going to be lenient when it comes to these sort of cases, we should exercise that same leniency when it comes to black perps as well. That's what I mean,
let's keep it real. There has always been a two-tier justice system, right?
Yeah.
And some of that, of course, has to do with racial background, but a lot of it also has to do with socioeconomic status.
Exactly.
So if you're, a white kid who comes from a wealthy or well-to-do family, you are able to afford a certain level of defense that people from a lower socioeconomic status or an underprivileged background wouldn't be able to. I mean, think about what happened with that affluenza case where an underage kid steals liquor from a Walmart store, drives a car without a license, and then crashes into people on the side of the road, killing several of them. And when he's, in court, one of the defense, one part of the defense was that, he comes from a wealthy family and he's been so lucky and privileged all his life that he's never had to face any consequences. So making him face consequences now would be really difficult for him.
The rejoinder is, let's start now, bitch. Here's your consequence. You're gonna suffer it.
Well, Ithaca attorney Raymond Schlatter, JD 76, would disagree with your statement. It seems like
jealous.
when you have that entire thing mapped out on your article, I feel like he's probably a good attorney.
Another interesting aspect of this is the difference between what we kind of talked about this with schools for minors, what a school district can do to punish kids. Now, there's another series of debate going on over what a university can do to punish a student because it exists outside of the criminal law system. So Cornell seems like they've taken certain steps, but they don't really have to, and they don't have to go in line with what happened with what the conclusion of a legal debate might be. You have at the University of Southern California, they had a kicker who was kicked off the football team because he was found choking his girlfriend.
Wow.
And she afterwards maintains, listen, nothing happened, it's a misunderstanding. SC is like, listen, we have your statement and the statement of other people saying it did happen. We can't wait for the conclusion of the legal battle. We're gonna kick this kid off because we're not beholden to the legal system. We have our own code of conduct, and he violated that, so he's off. So wow. Cornell can act outside of that system and say, listen, we don't have to wait until he's convicted or not. We can get rid of this person based on what we think is a preponderance of evidence or whatever their standard is.
Right. I think a great solution to all of this is concealed carry on college campuses. Because
wow, you're so right.
No, but think about that. Like, that's what the NRA pushes for, and that's what members of the GOP who are funded by the NRA push for. Yeah, concealed carry on college campuses. Let's give these kids a gun.
Just saying, he wouldn't have broken his nose, he would have efficiently murdered him.
That's right. That's right. So whether it was racially motivated or not, this was a violent act, and you put a weapon in that person's hand, and it would have ended much worse.
Another thing is for schools like Cornell, for like top tier private schools, the thing they think about when weighing what their conclusion will be is absolutely reputation, reputation, reputation. So if everyone watching out there makes a big stink about this, you can absolutely, especially in the case of an Ivy League school, affect change. Because people like SC, they had been under intense scrutiny because of other violations in the past, and so they wanted to get ahead of the next one. If you go and hold Cornell to intense scrutiny, they will do everything in their power to stay ahead of the next one.
Yeah. All right, I am gonna skip ahead to sex robots.
Please do. I need a sex robot after all this shit.
It's a very old school second hour type story.
I know, I was just thinking that too when I saw this.
And we need a little bit of a break from all the terrible stuff that's going on.
I thought you were hitting the NRA pretty hard. I thought we were for sure gonna cover that.
It's a really good story that we're skipping.
Yeah,
if we have time, we should.
I agree.
Okay, let's do that then. Sorry, guys.
I really like that
I didn't know if you guys were into the story, but I do
so into
agree.
it.
So let's do it. Okay. The Trump administration is planning on loosening restrictions on the export of small arms to foreigners who want to buy guns that are manufactured here in the United States. Now, before I get into what the Trump administration is doing and how this is likely to impact not only foreigners but people in the United States, I just want to be clear that this was not a policy that began under the Trump administration. It actually has been in the works for the last 5 years, and one of the reasons why the Obama administration never did this was because every time they wanted to, there would be a mass shooting in the US, and didn't really play out well politically to support this type of policy. Now, aides to President Donald Trump are completing a plan to shift oversight of international non-military firearm sales from the State Department to the Commerce Department. According to a senior administration official, there will be more leeway to do arms sales. You could really turn the spotlight on if you do it the right way. Now, let me break things down a little bit. So when it comes to the Defense Department, if they are in charge of oversight in regard to the sale of small arms to foreigners, they're gonna have stricter regulations, right? Because they're gonna keep national security in mind. They might be a little more considerate about civil rights abroad and how these weapons might be misused. But when it comes to the Commerce Department, it's a little different. They deal with trade. And so if the goal here is to help benefit weapons manufacturers in the United States and increase exports, well, this is what the Commerce Department would want to do. So there's going to be less regulation, less oversight. The changes, which can be enacted without congressional approval, could be made public this fall, followed by a period of public comment with implementation as early as the first half of next year. Now, Saudi Arabia is one of the main countries that's interested in enjoying the benefits of this program and its lack of oversight.
Well, it's not just small arms that we sell to Saudi Arabia, as we found out after Donald Trump's Saudi visit.
Right.
Yeah, we sell them bombs too.
Of course we do, which is fascinating considering Saudi Arabia's involvement in what happened on 9/11. But there's no travel ban from Saudi Arabia, maybe because there's some financial interest that Trump has with that country, right? Now, since Trump was elected in November, the share price for gun manufacturers actually has gone down, and that's because Americans are less concerned about gun regulation under Republican leadership. And so since stock prices have gone down, I'm guessing, and this is speculation on my part, that it kind of led Trump and his officials to decide to really go for this policy. And by the way, it does not require congressional approval. This can be done unilaterally by the executive branch. On Tuesday, following the Reuters report on the administration's plans, the share prices, though, of these gun manufacturers did go up as much as 18%. So gun manufacturers get to make some money, and the amount of sales, foreign sales, is expected to go up as much as 15 to 20% annually.
That, by the way, that's my favorite factoid ever of all time, is that domestic gun sales fall significantly under Donald Trump. And the NRA, which has nothing to do with protecting your constitutional Second Amendment rights at all, and everything to do with the financial interests of the gun manufacturers that they represent, is so desperate to sell more guns that they are now running on this narrative with Dana Loesch, if you guys remember, and this is something I covered a couple of times, like where they're running on this narrative that a civil war is likely to happen, and that there are protesters out on the streets that are violent Antifa thugs, and you need to arm yourself to potentially defend yourself.
Right.
Like they've gone to such lengths that they would literally start a civil war if they potentially could. And now instead of doing that, we're going to be exporting our second most successful industry after Hollywood, which is just gun violence. And now, France can have more of that. When we think about mitigating the damage of terrorism in Europe, a big part of that is because they do have very strict gun control laws, and that it is very difficult to find small arms, as they call, like small arms. For those of you who don't know, assault rifles are still considered under small arms, like an AR-15. Now they'll be able to mow down crowds with the same efficiency that they'd be able to do here, like they do in San Bernardino, for example.
If we sell guns to Saudi Arabia, I wonder how how the right will respond to the fact that you're arming Arabs.
What do you mean? We arm Arabs all the time.
Like putting it together, like but I know you're doing it, but like that's what it is. You're putting the gun in the hand of. I mean, the what you're saying about the Civil War is coming. It's and the Second Amendment's wording is to like create militias. To have a well-regulated militia. We're arming militias, and the difference is now we can't track it. We can't. There's no executive branch involved, and yeah, you should be cynical of the executive branch when they're making deals with foreign governments, but especially you should be cynical of these companies that are just going to try to pour guns in the hands of literally anyone. You talked about Fast and Furious being like a government or operation that funneled guns in there and then lost track of them. There is no original keep track of them aspect possible now.
That's right.
It's just going to be in there, and they're going to be in the hands of whoever wants to buy one.
So the reporter that worked on this story was interviewed, and it was kind of interesting because his take, I don't know if he was trying to remain objective, but in doing so, he actually ended up appearing to be way more biased. But he wasn't necessarily against this policy because he had the same mentality of, well, if those bad guys want to get their hands on guns, they'll get their hands on guns anyway. So let's just lift regulations and do away with oversight and just increase the number of guns
and make it way easier for bad guys to get guns.
I mean, okay. I mean, if that's your argument, then you don't get to complain when the wrong people get their hands on their guns, right? Because you gotta, follow the paper trail. And as Brett perfectly mentions, there isn't really gonna be a paper trail. We're not going to track where these guns go or what they're gonna be used for. There's a lot of unrest in a lot of countries right now.
They're gonna kill American soldiers. These guns are going to kill American soldiers eventually.
I mean, but this isn't new. Like we've been arming rebel factions that end up turning on American soldiers since, I don't know, this is like 30 years ago. Like even longer than that. We've always been doing that. And it's not new.
That's imperialism.
We might as well give them small arms on top of the heat-seeking missiles that we're supplying the Saudi Arabian military with so they can fucking destroy Yemen. And now at least like the civilians will get to have fun with AR-15s and be able to shoot whatever kind of slaves they own in their compounds if they act out.
Chinese sex robots, Chinese sex robots.
Yes, okay, so let's do that and then we gotta end the show. We're running out of time. Entrepreneurial individuals in China wanted to help men in China who maybe aren't getting a little bit of action and maybe want to have sex with robots.
Yes.
Okay, so they created an app. The app was advertised on the microblogging platform Weibo, a sharing girlfriend service offering realistic sex dolls that were totally submissive and can meet the needs of a single homeboy. I like their use of homeboy there.
Homeboy.
Now the sex dolls came in 5 models reflecting different ethnicities: Greek bikini model, US Wonder Woman, Korean housewife, Russian teenager, and Hong Kong car race cheerleader. Now officials in China have put a stop to this. And they're saying that it's unacceptable. Chinese police slapped a fine of several thousand yuan on the company for holding vulgar activities disturbing social order, and that's according to local media reports. Now, keep in mind that because of China's one-child policy, which they've loosened a bit recently, there are more men in China than women. In fact, China faces an enormous gender imbalance, with men of marrying age projected to outnumber females by at least 30 million by 2020. And so there aren't a lot of women, a ton of men. There is nothing more dangerous than men who haven't had sex. I mean, we're experiencing that right now in the United States with the alt-right.
I was just about to say that.
And so I let them have the sex robots, dude. Like you don't want sexually frustrated dudes running around. It's a really bad idea.
Horny boys turn into proud boys. And I'm very surprised, quite frankly, that China doesn't have this like massive alt-right community now. I mean, they do have a problem with sexual assault and sexual harassment, and anything that stops that or pushes those numbers down as best as possible, whether it's a waifu or sex dolls, they good, go for it.
Don't let them have the Russian teenager one. I don't like the word teenager, it weirds me out. Also, if we're going to try to affect some kind of alliance, betterment, improve relations, I want them to have the US Wonder Woman one and not the Russian, because I don't want to
But aren't they
condition
fucking?
them to
They're
be
having.
more.
They're fucking.
They're making
the
love.
US.
You can say make love.
Yeah.
Are you making love to a doll? Or is
Me?
it having sex?
By the way, they're
personally.
renting these dolls.
That's the
which I was-
creepiest part.
Right. So I mean, they apparently
They're expensive.
have like a removable, replaceable middle section.
What is your vagina doing in the sink?
But it's just fascinating that this business model exists. Unfortunately, authorities have put a stop to it. And I only say that it's unfortunate because it's people's personal lives. If they need this, if this makes them feel better, let them have it. Let's move on.
What do you think about that? It was disrespectful to women, like the way they were portrayed.
Let's discuss that in the post-game show. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Sorry, guys. If you're a member, check out the post-game show. Thank you for doing the show with me, guys. We love you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey guys, welcome back to Think Tank. I'm Hannah Cranston and this is Nando Vila, and we have an awesome show for you today. First, we're going to start off and talk about climate change. Then we're gonna talk about porn.
Fun.
And then clowns. So I think it's pretty well rounded.
What more could you ask for?
I don't think much more. I really think that's what all discussions should center around. But let's hop
Sounds
right
like my
in.
first date.
Let's hop right in and start with climate change because this is very serious right now. In the wake of Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Harvey, there's been a lot of discussion about how to mitigate some of the effects of these catastrophic hurricanes. But White House officials are saying now is not the time to talk about climate change.
Right.
Okay, so let's jump into some of the quotes from the White House that they've released in the wake of these hurricanes. Now, White House advisor Tom Bossert said at a press briefing on Monday that it was too early to say whether climate change played a role and insisted that they are taking climate change seriously, though not the cause of it, but the things that we observe. So that's like looking at like the effects of something, but not the root of the problem. It's more of like damage control.
It's a very strange way to
preventative.
phrase that thing. I don't know.
Well, they're not allowed to actually say the word
Right.
in the EPA and things like that. He said, causality is something outside of my ability to analyze right now. Lucky for him, there's a lot of climate scientists who could provide that analysis if you would say that it's a real thing. Now, additionally, when the White House press secretary was asked if Irma and Harvey, which have both been thought to have been intensified by climate change, had caused Trump to reconsider his position. Now, if you guys don't remember, his position is that climate change is a Chinese hoax and he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. She said that he had not. I don't think that it's changed over the last several weeks, even though he's been the one that's been saying that these hurricanes are epic and historic. Now, further, in an interview with CNN, Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt said, to have any kind of focus on the cause and effect of the storm versus helping people or actually facing the effect of the storm is misplaced. He further said it was insensitive. That is like saying that, like, I'm trying to think of like an example. Like if like there's ISIS beheading, right? Like let's look at, we need to really be focusing on the beheading, not ISIS.
Yeah, the type of knife they used or whatever. So, I mean, conservatives love to do this. I mean, they do this exact thing whenever there's a mass shooting, you know, like it's like in the immediate wake of the mass shooting, they don't want to talk about gun control. They say they want to politicize something. It's very, it's a very convenient sleight of hand that they do with climate change where they say, you know, in the wake of a massive storm that has caused, I mean, the last thing I think Irma has caused, the last figure I saw was like something like 22 deaths or something crazy. You know, it's not time to talk about like politicize this. It's not time to talk about, we got to focus on, you know, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But then when there are no storms and everyone's like, okay, there's no, you know, like, then they go, wait, where are the storms? Where's the climate change? It's, you know, like so it's like a very convenient kind of catch-22, which is just like totally maddening. Yeah,
it's convenient maybe for their talking points, but not convenient for all their constituents or having to flee their homes and are facing potentially death or all of this damage, right? And we've talked about this in Think Tank episode after Think Tank episode, but there are, you know, there is scientific evidence that these hurricanes are exacerbated by climate change. Nobody's saying that climate change is the sole cause of the hurricanes. Nobody's saying that, but they're exacerbated, right? Because these are these like thermodynamic, functions or whatever. When you have rising levels in sea level and also rising temperatures of the sea, that is going to make these storms much bigger, much more intense. Further, like if there's, elongated seasons and things like that we're experiencing with climate change, that's going to elongate hurricane season and have more damaging effects. And we need to, I understand that. I think for some people it's like, okay, the rising levels of 2 degrees Celsius. And even though that's a very tangible number, that feels very
minor.
Yeah, it feels minor. It doesn't feel as
it's a huge
impactful.
deal.
It's a huge, huge deal. But when you're seeing these epic and historic hurricanes that we are even acknowledging that are epic and historic, and you're seeing all these people dying and these people suffering and these cities that are underwater,
my city.
Yeah, your
I'm from
city
Miami.
is underwater. I don't know how you ignore the causality or the the driving force for a lot of these natural disasters that are just becoming more disastrous because we are just emitting a lot of
the frustrating thing with climate change is that if you look at what scientists are saying, they say yes, they don't know whether this specific storm, they don't have enough data to deal in the narrow sense with this specific storm, right? Because climate change is a massive phenomenon that has multi-leveled effects, and there's a million little factors that go into any one thing. So you can't. It's very difficult to make a very clear, just kind of X plus Y equals Z. It's just it's a very it's a giant global system, right? But it is clear that warmer waters do intensify hurricanes.
Right.
So we don't want warmer waters if we don't want intense hurricanes. Maybe it is possible that with colder waters there will be a massive storm. That is possible, but it is less likely.
And it's less, it's not as likely to be as intense, right? So these are important things to think about. And I'm curious what you guys think. Is now the time to be talking about climate change? Or do you think that it's insensitive to the people who are suffering from these hurricanes?
No, it's the sensitive thing.
I want you guys to let us know. And we will be talking about porn when we come back from the break. So I'm sure you're gonna wanna stick around for that. And I think you might be a little surprised by my stance about the recent political porn scandal.
You'll also be surprised by her porn consumption habits.
All right, well.
Sorry.
All right,
they're a little weird.
See you soon. All right, welcome back to Think Tank, and welcome back to Nando porn shaming me.
I'm not porn shaming.
You said that they were weird, okay? Everybody can have their proclivities when it comes to porn, and we don't want to shame anybody for their fantasies.
I'm sorry.
And you don't know what I watch. You don't know my life.
Oh yeah, I've been following your Twitter account.
That's why we're moving into clowns, because clown porn is my thing. Now my mom's gonna hear that, and things are gonna get awkward. All right, so now let's talk about shift away from me and talk about Ted Cruz.
Yes.
Ted Cruz has been involved in a recent porn scandal. You might have seen it trending on Twitter because on September 11th, someone with access to Ted Cruz's personal Twitter account liked a post by another account named Sexual LL post, which included an attached pornographic video. Now, his communication director, Catherine Frazier, said that the offensive tweet posted on Ted Cruz's account earlier has been removed by staff and reported to Twitter. You can see the post here. I believe it was something like MILF hunting or something.
Yeah, it was a woman masturbating while another couple had sex.
Yeah, and so he didn't repost it, he liked it. Or somebody with access to his account liked it. Now, I wanna go back a little bit because he said that it's a staffing error and that it was inadvertent, whatever. I don't really give an F, to be honest with you. Ted Cruz, watch your porn. If you're into MILFs, have at it. A porn is a very healthy habit.
Ted Cruz can masturbate on 9/11 just like anybody else.
Yeah, I don't really care. I don't care that it was, frankly, I don't care that it was September 11th. I don't care that he was watching porn. I think it's great. Maybe it'll make him loosen him up a little bit, and he'll be a little bit more normal when it comes to his policies. But the problemo is that Cruz has been a fierce advocate against marriage equality and once urged people to fall to their knees and pray against same-sex marriage legalization as the Supreme Court was ruling on the topic back in 2015. He has also worked to uphold a Texas law that prohibits the sale of dildos in order to protect public morals. And in 2012, before Cruz entered the Senate, the Texas GOP platform advocated for abstinence-only education. All right, so here's the issue, is that Ted Cruz, semi-okay with, well, hating on other people's sexuality and trying to literally put government into their lives and prevent them from doing that. And then
prevent them from buying dildos.
Seems a little hip, well, because that's for women. It's okay if he does it, because he's a man. But if a woman wants to have sexual satisfaction, no, that's not okay. So basically,
the idea of Ted Cruz trying to like satisfy a woman is giving me like, it's making me shudder on the inside.
I'm sure they have a beautiful. If he has, I mean, if he is watching this porn, maybe he has a very healthy sexual relationship with Heidi.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Like, more power to them. I encourage that. But what I don't encourage is being a hypocritical asshole.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the issue, is that you can't try to control other people's sexualities, and period. And then additionally, also be exploring your own. You know what I mean? Like, pick a lane, bro.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of questions that arise from this incident. It was one of my favorite incidents of 2017. I've greatly enjoyed it. Greatly enjoyed Ted Cruz's, being in the eye of the storm over this. One big question, and Libby Watson over at Splinter has done a deep investigation into this, is who actually liked the tweet? Was it Ted Cruz himself? And who was it? She actually narrowed it down to about 3 possible people.
Okay, who were the 3 people?
I don't remember their names, but it's basically because there's 2 different accounts. There's the Senate account, for his because he's a U.S. senator, and then there's like his personal, which is run by the campaign. It's like they always keep them separate to like avoid any sort of conflict of interest over, I don't know, like something.
Porn.
Yeah. So she looked at the people who were on the payroll of his campaign. At the time of the liked tweet on September 11th, 12:30 a.m. And she narrowed it down to basically.
It was 12:30 a.m.?
Yeah, it was late at night.
Okay, so it's sort of September 11th. You didn't fully understand this.
It was a very rough day for all of us.
Yeah.
And so either it was himself, which is possible. It's possible that Ted Cruz is looking at porn through Twitter as a way to avoid, like search browser history.
Well, I was gonna ask you, like, who watches porn on Twitter?
No one. But what you're asking me, you don't.
Well, I watch porn, but not on Twitter.
Right. No, neither do I.
That's like a weird like.
I suspect if you're watching porn on Twitter, it's to avoid any browser history issues, like where you type in, because like on Twitter it doesn't work like that. But Ted Cruz is an old man, so maybe he doesn't realize that liking a tweet is a public thing.
Or maybe it was by accidental, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like he got like a little excited and then and so, but then there's also one of like his campaign's communications advisor. There's this other guy, I forgot what he was. There's one guy who seems to be very much in control of his Twitter account, and he brags about it on his own social media sometimes, about how he tweets and especially with regards to Deadspin, they had like a little run-in. So it's likely him. There's a woman who tweeted out at 2 a.m. that night,
so
addressing. She was up and tweeting. So questions are arising.
What is it with Republicans tweeting in the middle of the night? They need some sleep. Sleep is very important.
It is.
Do you know
that's
what
the real problem here. Ted Cruz is not getting enough sleep.
That's what I'm really worried about. Okay, so that's interesting. So there could be other people. I don't care if it's him. I don't care if it's other people.
But Ted Cruz, he's a hypocritical asshole.
That's the problem with it. And frankly, if you are working for somebody who has that too, like you presume that maybe they'd be in line with their sexual hatred or something like that. I don't know. Let us know what you guys think about this, because I say have at it, Ted Cruz. Just don't, maybe this will be a nice little learning lesson. You won't be an asshole to like other people's sexual orientations or sexual desires. I don't know. Let us know what you think. And when we come back, we will be talking about clowns and how they might be getting themselves out of work because of it. Welcome Welcome back to Think Tank for our third and final story of the day. And luckily, it's about clowns. Now, after the release of the It movie, clowns are fearful for their jobs because kids might be fearful of clowns. Now, there was a show that's basically like Good Morning America. It's called This Morning in the UK. And they interviewed some professional clowns about some of the struggles they've been going through in the aftermath of the movie It, which brought in like an insane amount of money its first weekend. So clearly people are very interested in seeing this movie. Let's see what they had to say.
It must have an effect on your business. I mean, do you find that now, because of this, people want less kids' parties involving clowns, or is it the same?
I represent Clowns International. Andrew represents the World Clowns Association. We've got many types of clowns. We've got hospital clowns who do brilliant work in hospitals with really sick children.
Ministry clowns who work in the church. Yeah.
We've got people who do parties.
Birthday parties, circus clowns, theatre clowns. There are many, many different styles of clowns.
So it's not just that the lazy journalists, the newspapers ring us all the while for that quote around Halloween. They're looking for that quote.
Okay, so I want to call attention just the beginning of this video when he's like doing his own little clown thing and they're in a serious interview, because that just like brightened my day. I'm gonna be honest with you, but these people are serious about this. They're like lazy journalists, like they're going in. They're yeah, you just want that quote around Halloween about scary clowns. They're not messing around. And so look, if you are passionate about clowning, and you want to brighten people's days and like things like that, I could see how a movie like this that demonizes clowns, or last year, 2 years ago when we had the killer clowns. Yeah. You know what I mean? With the machetes and things like that. Yeah. It's not good. It's not good for the payroll, you know?
I just want to, breaking news for these two guys. People's fear of clowns predates the movie It. Even the original movie It, because this is a remake.
So they claim that the term, I don't know, what's the term for the phobia for clowns called again? I forget.
Clownophobia.
Sure. They claim in this clip, you can watch the full clip, I think it's on This Morning. You can watch the full clip, but they claim in this clip that the fear of clowns didn't really have a spike until the book came out in the 80s.
Oh, I guess. I mean, I remember a Goosebumps book about clowns. Remember Goosebumps?
Yeah, but that was the 90s, right?
Right, and then I remember Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Still 90s.
Right, but I'm saying
so maybe this is like a new
think like
thing.
Clowns, I mean, I suspect that It probably, the original book, It, the Stephen King book, probably tapped into an already existing fear of clowns.
It's possible.
And that's why it was so popular. That was latent under the surface in the society, but no one was brave enough to talk about it because of big clown lobby. You know, so he basically just tapped into an already existing sort of energy within the society. He didn't invent clownophobia. He just brought it to light.
Yeah, and what these guys would call him is a lazy journalist.
Stephen King?
For doing that. Yeah, I mean that's basically what they're saying here. I feel for them, I think. I don't know why. I think I just have like
maybe
a lot
because they're just wearing the makeup
I know. It's just
on national TV.
Like I don't know what kind of person or what inspires you to like wake up one morning and you're like, I want to put on giant red shoes, paint my face, and pull flowers out of my shirt. Like I don't know where that inspiration comes from, but I think it takes a special and frankly amazing person to be like, I'm gonna make people like laugh and do this at kids' parties. Like I think there's something like weirdly like cool and just like very genuine about that.
Well, clowns take their craft very seriously.
Yeah.
There's clown schools. They, like the, to be like a clown at the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, which doesn't exist anymore, I guess. But you have to go through like the whole academy and like
those balloon animals.
lessons.
Have you seen some of the crazy ones?
Oh yeah. They can do wonders with those balloons. They can do whatever you like.
That is an art form.
Yes, it is just as legitimate as any sort of other art form.
But they brought up a good point here. Like there's clowns that go to hospitals and try to brighten up kids' days and like things like that. And so I just feel for them that.
Yeah, you know, well, I mean, unclear whether, I mean, there's probably some kids whose days are, some kids whose days are brightened by the clowns, some kids who are terrified by these guys with like, who all of a sudden come in with like a white face and a big red nose, and you're a child and you're like, what's wrong with his nose? And then he's like, oh, boink, you know, like.
You could say the same about anything. Like, I think that I love these guys just because of, like, look at them, how could you not?
Yeah, he's got a giant bow tie.
But you could say the same for anything, right? When you're talking about a scary movie or something like that. There's kids who are like terrified of dogs, and there's dogs that go to hospitals to help sick kids or whatever because they saw, what's the movie with the scary dog?
Cujo?
Cujo, you know what I mean? There's movies where there's like women, like serial killers or whatever. It's like, then it's not like you're gonna like be like, well, women are out of work now. Just like, get rid of that. Well, you know what I mean? So I get what they're saying. I feel for them.
Have you seen it?
Because it's a very niche thing.
On the topic?
No, because fuck scary movies. I like to sleep at night.
You get nightmares too?
Yeah.
I get nightmares too.
I know, we've actually talked about our nightmares before.
Yeah.
Because they're very real and very serious, and
I wonder what
don't
that
think
says
I
about
could
us.
handle that. Maybe we're just fearful about everything. But not clowns. Clowns don't do it for me.
No?
To be real. No, clowns don't do it for me.
You're pro-clown.
I'm pro-clown. I'm pro these guys especially.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what you guys think about this. Do you think the It movie will put clowns out of work? Do you think clowns are scary? Let us know. That is our show for today. Thank you so much for watching Think Tank. You can follow me at Hannah Cranston and follow Nando at Nando Vila.
Nando R. Vila.
Oh, Nando R. Vila.
Sorry.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Hello and welcome to Murder with Friends, the show where two friends get together and talk about the darker sides of history. I'm your host, Grace Baldridge, and joining me today is one of my favorite people in the entire world, one of my oldest friends. You came on for one of the first episodes of Murder with Friends, Darren Dean. Darren, welcome to the new and improved Murder with Friends.
I'm glad to be back.
So you did come on the show before, but again, I referenced these episodes before. You guys will never see them unless you want to get members content. Amir and I are gonna start reacting to the early episodes. But you came on before we knew what the show was, and that was, your episode stuck out to me because we talked about Andre Chikatilo, who we're gonna be talking about today. But the format of the show was that I did a whole bunch of research, sat you down, and just spat facts at you, and sort of told you that we were gonna have coffee in the afternoon and that you might be on camera. And then it was like, oh, by the way, he ate body parts.
Yeah, so it was a little bit overwhelming, but I think this time I've done a little research of my own, so I'm a little bit more mentally prepared. So I'm ready to go.
I think this time it's gonna work out a lot better.
Yeah.
I think this one is actually gonna make it on a channel.
This is gonna be the one.
So how do you and I, really quickly, how do we know each other?
So Grace and I went to college together during our dark years, as I like to call it. So we went to the same college for 1 year, and then we both transferred out, and we stayed friends. So that's the short version of it. There's a lot more things in there.
People.
Yeah, there's a lot more in there that we don't really want to talk about.
Friends that are sad together stay together.
Exactly.
I think that's what we learned. And what is sort of your interest in true crime or murder or cases, prolific killers?
I guess like my mom and I and my sisters, we all started watching Forensic Files, like the old school, murder documentaries when I was in high school. So I kind of just like grew up kind of being fascinated by it and like watching it at night with my mom and my sisters. And now she's on to Dateline, so now we watch Dateline.
Oh, she's ratcheted up a little bit.
Yeah,
you go from Forensic Files, because that's only 30 minutes, to Dateline.
Exactly.
It's about
an hour long, yeah. So yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about Andre Chikatilo, who was a case that a figure you guys have requested, and we are honoring these requests. We're trying to go a little bit more international in 2017, as I've said before. He was a Soviet killer who was around or active between 1978 and 1990. I think it's important to mention, from what I've read on Reddit, that he was a Ukrainian killer that killed people in Russia. So a lot of people say that he was this Russian serial killer. I think the term that's more appropriate is Soviet, but he has confirmed to kill 53 people independently. That's what we can confirm, but he has claimed that he has killed about 56 people. And with that being said, we're going to dive into his story, but let's go to our first clip of who we're going to be talking about today.
Andre Chikatilo. Between December of 1978 and November 1990, Andre Chikatilo's murderous career saw him kill at least 56 people according to his own confession, making him out as one of the worst serial killers in history based on pure numbers alone. Hints of the monster that Chikatilo would become began to surface when he worked as a teacher, with numerous accusations of sexual assault being made against him by students that eventually led to his firing in 1981. However, his killings had started before that final assault, with the murder of Yelena Zakotnova in 1978 following a failed rape attempt. He seemed to have stabbed his victims in a frenzy before mutilating their body and dumping it. On occasion, tongue tips and some of the organs of his victims appear to have been bitten off, hinting at cannibalistic nature.
So, hope you weren't eating. But with that being said, we're going to dive into his childhood and his upbringing. And I think this is a really interesting part of Chikatilo's story because the setting with which he was raised, I think, absolutely played a part into his psychosis and how he developed into a killer and just what he was exposed to. He was born October 16th, 1936 in, and I'm going to butcher a lot of names here, so please, Ukrainian and Russian viewers in the comment section, please be nice to me, Yablokanoye, Ukraine. And this was a rural Ukrainian village and suffering very heavily under some of Stalin's agricultural collectivization policies, and this caused widespread famine, just a lot of poverty that was just throughout the country right now that he was growing up in, and this affected his development as a kid. Can you sort of expand on that?
Yeah, so I was doing a little bit of research on it, and it said that when he was born, he was believed to have suffered from water on the brain, which caused him to have a genital urinary tract issues later in life, including bedwetting, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which kind of caused him to get teased a lot in school. So he had a bedwetting problem up until his late teens. And later in his life, which is kind of an important aspect of his killing, is that he was unable to sustain an erection.
Right, he was impotent, and that is a major point in his life, and it's something that he struggled with throughout his life that definitely comes up, especially in trial, which we will definitely get to. He was raised also without a father. His father was, I mean, he knew who he was, but he was at war a lot. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what Chikatilo was being raised in, what the climate was in Ukraine during this time, let's go to a clip right now, narrated by my girl Meryl Streep, about, about this time in Ukraine's history. Let's take a look.
In the 1930s, the Soviet government, under Joseph Stalin, turned on its own people, as Stalin mobilized a vast state apparatus to crush those he considered a threat to his power. No fewer than 20 million people lost their lives. How did Soviet communism come to kill so many of its own? While some died in labor camps, and others starved in state-induced famine, more than 1.5 million men and women were executed for crimes against the state. The period has come to be known as the Great Terror.
So that really sets the scene for what will be a dark life that was that existed in a dark time in a country's history, which I think is just the setting here is particularly harsh, perhaps the harshest of any killer that we've covered so far, because you hear about there's trouble at home and things aren't going so well, but maybe he was born into poverty, but this was a deeply ingrained national poverty. The story, he said that he didn't even know the taste of bread until he was 12 years old. I mean, that sort of hunger, that ache. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was that his mom told him that his own brother had been murdered and cannibalized, although this has never been confirmed. And that the brother may not have ever existed, but that his mom told him this to sort of keep him in line. And then again, he was also bedwetting. There's a lot going on within his family structure, and his mom doing what she could to keep her son in check. And then also there's a lot going on in just the culture of Ukraine at the time. It just sets a really sinister scene for what is to come. But that being said, he starts to lead a pretty boring life. everything is pretty dark and bleak for him, but he just goes on. He's a model student. He's an ardent communist. He also is impotent. And now I think we should sort of talk about that, because while he goes on, he's good in school. He doesn't have a lot of friends. He's kind of nerdy. The major factor that comes into play is his lack of success with women. And I read that he had a number of unsuccessful and humiliating sexual encounters that were at the age of 15 or 17, where he would try and overpower a girl.
Yeah, and I think kind of the first time that he found that he kind of liked that feeling of you know, overpowering a girl was, I think it said he was maybe 17 and she was 11, and it was like one of his sister's friends or something, and he overpowered her. And while she was struggling, he ejaculated. And so, like, although he didn't, you know, have sex or anything, he found that when he was, you know, in this act of
the
basically,
power play.
yeah. So being in that place where he was overpowering somebody, he like actually got to feel a release finally.
That's so interesting that early on he would make note that it's the power struggle that really arouses him and excites him. And just that he was so young when he discovered that is really unsettling. And it's also unsettling because he goes on to become a teacher. So he's a telephone engineer for a time, and he moves to Russia, and he lives with his sister. But then he becomes a teacher. That's something that he's interested in doing, speaking with young people, working with young people, and knowing what he had already known about himself and his relationship to those who are younger than him. That's what's so creepy about it.
Yeah.
So he lives with his sister. They live together, and then in 1963, pretty shortly after they started living together, she gets sick of him.
Surprise.
I mean, yeah, surprise, surprise. And she sets him up with a local spinster. I don't think that's a very nice word, but everything that I've read has sort of said she was a lonely woman. Some have said that she was divorced. I found two accounts of her name, Faina or Fedosia. So that's another, the public record is a little bit difficult to track down, given that this was, you know, Soviet era Russia. And that is gonna get even more frustrating when we get into the investigation, but just tracking down little details on what was the given name at birth for his wife is frustrating. They have 2 kids, despite his sex problems, and he just continues being a school teacher, but very quickly, around 1971, 1970s, complaints come in from parents and from other teachers. And I don't know if you've heard any of these that you want to share an anecdote about.
Right. I mean, I just read that he basically had to move from school to school to kind of avoid getting in trouble for, you know, having like inappropriate relations with kids.
Or just even sexual harassment. That's what I was reading about. I read that one of his jobs at one of the schools he worked at was for kids that were in boarding school. He had to make sure that they were in their dorms at the correct time. And he would schedule his walk-ins when they would likely be changing. And a lot of this was also young girls. So when we get into the victimology a little bit later, we'll see that he didn't really discriminate across age, although they were young, and he didn't really discriminate across genders either, but his early sexual deviance predominantly did exist with girls. So that's something I think is interesting, worth noting. And something that really sits not well with me, Darren, about this is that he was able to find teaching work despite what you mentioned between 1971.
He was able to switch schools and just kind of keep avoiding
for the better part of a decade.
Yeah, while still continuing to like sexually harass these kids.
Yeah, and he hadn't really ratcheted it up yet. But I think that we see over a decade, because of the lack of oversight and regulation and communication within these school departments, which is, again, remember what time period we're talking about, he was able to get away with so much. And that people had no idea who they were hiring. And a lot of what this story comes back to for me is sort of the monster next door could be your teacher.
Exactly.
But he does ratchet up over these 10 years. It's not enough to just this sort of this harassment. Someone said that he assaulted them in a swimming pool, which is so terrifying for me because I'm a bad swimmer. He does ratchet it up, and I want to go to a clip right now talking about this first murder and what it would lead to.
First, he acquired a small shack in a rundown neighborhood. In December, he took a 9-year-old girl there. Her name was Yelena Zakatnova. Her friends called her Lena. He'd met her at a bus stop and offered her something Soviet children rarely enjoyed, bubble gum. She agreed to follow him to the house.
He encountered this girl and first discovered with her that violence on the body of a girl was something that would get him excited.
As he began to molest her, he grew increasingly excited and wanted more direct sexual contact with her.
He was unable to perform sexually, so he used a knife instead.
It was the moment when he discovered that murder was his passion. After that, he knew himself in a new way.
So at this point, a killer is born.
Yeah.
He hasn't yet descended to the serial killer madness that we will eventually know as Andre Chikatilo, but he realizes that this is the ultimate release for him.
Yeah, definitely took a turn here.
The 10 years of sexual assault, harassment, misconduct pales in comparison to what he feels for killing this girl. He goes on to dump her body in the river, dump her bags in the river, and then even though there were multiple witnesses that placed him around the scene at the time that were able to see him and that did report this to authorities, his wife gave him an alibi because remember, he was married with 2 kids at the time. He was a teacher. He wasn't what we would think of or what anyone would think of as a madman, a killer that's gonna, abduct a 9-year-old girl. How could he abduct a 9-year-old girl?
Yeah.
He's a teacher, and all his misconduct was hidden from the record.
It's very troubling. Not only that nobody kind of like took a step back and was like, okay, look at his history. Is this a possibility? But also that his wife, even though he obviously wasn't there at the time, she was totally okay with lying about it. And
right.
I mean, she probably didn't know anything that was going on either, but still.
No one would assume that.
Yeah, exactly. No one would
he
assume
wasn't where he
their
said he
spouse
was, so therefore he's a killer.
Exactly.
And then also another man is convicted and killed of this crime, of the 9-year-old girl. And it's only later that he would confess that it was in fact him.
Yeah, and I was reading that their like the way that they would interrogate people was so harsh that they would get a lot of false confessions for things that people didn't even do. So that kind of just is like another just way that he didn't get caught again for like a short period of time.
Yeah, sort of a warped and perverted justice system that is looking for a sort of a clean way of tidying up a case rather than hunting down the truth. And we're going to get into that for sure because, the police attention, even though it was minor and didn't apprehend him, really freaked him out. So he moves to the small town of Rostov, and this is where things really pick up in the Andre Chikatilo story. This is where he becomes a serial killer. He has access to public transportation. This changes everything. And when we come back, we're going to tell you all about his descent into serial killer infamy. Welcome back to Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about Andre Chikatilo with my friend Darren Dean. And where we're picking up, Andre Chikatilo has committed his first murder in 1978, but by 1981 he really descends into becoming a serial killer. And like we said in part 1, if you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch that. He will kill upwards of 52, 53 women. He's confessed to 56. So we can't get into every single victim, but I think that we should talk a little bit about the victimology, how he tracked down these victims, and what was the importance of the transportation system and living near trains during this time.
He could pick up basically anybody who was traveling, transients, anybody who was kind of hanging around. I think he would generally pick people who were younger, who kind of seemed like they were alone by themselves. So it was a perfect place for him to pick off people, basically.
Yeah, and another part of his MO was befriending his victims. So that's how he got away with, I think, so much, is because his demeanor and how he carried himself. Again, he was a teacher, and he was an older gentleman, and he had glasses. He seemed very mild-mannered, and so if you were to see him approaching a young runaway, or again, it was really hard to track down where everyone was during this time, you wouldn't really be alarmed. There wasn't anything very sinister about his appearance.
Yeah, and I don't think that the victims were alarmed either. I mean, all of them walked off with him at some point.
Right.
So they felt safe with him.
With the promise of some sort of a treat.
Yeah.
Or the promise of some sort of a cool gadget that he had access to that wasn't available in Soviet Russia. They were younger. When I say that he didn't discriminate against age, I think that probably below like 25 and down.
Yeah, I think there was only one woman who was older than that, and the rest were pretty much teenagers and young kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And most of them were women, but he did in fact kill young boys as well. And that is very strange to me because when we talked about his early sexual deviance, it was exclusively towards young girls. So the switch to young boys indicates to me that this was his taste for murder. And he realized that his sexual gratification came more from the act of killing and stabbing to overcompensate for his impotence than the sexual attraction to a specific body type.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the descent. That's when you become a monster in my mind.
Totally.
Because you're attracted to killing, you're not attracted to the victims. It becomes less about the victims. But another part about the train and the transportation element to his story is that he was able to move away from his crime scene without there being, you know, much to do about it.
Right.
It was very normal for people to take the trains to commute to and from work. It's very normal for him to have train tickets and for him to, you know, have that as sort of an alibi to show his wife, you know, where he had been, even though she knew. She has sort of alluded that she has known that something was up, but I guess didn't really care. I don't know. How would you not care?
Yeah, I mean, for anybody, I'm sure it would be hard to believe that the person you're married to is a serial killer.
And also, most of Soviet Russia was unaware that there was a serial killer about.
Yeah,
they just knew that kids were disappearing, that transients, that runaways, that people that were, you know, going to school or that were just figuring their way out, trying to find their way to Moscow or more opportunity, they were just disappearing. And that wasn't very odd. And I guess they didn't know that they should be on the lookout for a serial killer.
Yeah, I think the media at that time didn't want to portray anything that was going bad in Russia.
I think it was less of a want and more of I think it was less of a choice. I think that because it was a state-controlled media at that time, I don't think they were given an option, should we run this story, should we not?
Yeah.
It just wasn't being reported and investigated in the capacity that it should have been. I also think we should touch a little bit on the desecration of the bodies.
Yeah.
Briefly. Stop eating. So a number of times he did eat sex organs and he would remove body parts like a nose or a tongue. He would slash out their eyes, something that I have learned from Criminal Minds, so probably not the most reputable source, but I know from Elliot Reed, the detective on Criminal Minds, that if you slash out the eyes, that it is an indication that you don't want the victim to look at you anymore, that it is sort of a shame. But also I know from actual research that there is sort of Russian folklore. They believe that the victim's last sight is imprinted on the eyes after death.
Yeah.
So when he's slashing the eyes, perhaps it had less to do with remorse, like Criminal Minds told me, and a little bit more to do with trying to get away with the crime.
Yeah.
Didn't want that imprint on the eyes.
Yeah, and I think he probably didn't want to feel like somebody remembered him killing them either. I think it's also more for him too.
So let's talk a little bit about state-controlled media and what that meant for this case and how it was underreported or how misinformation was allowed to spread. What was the biggest sort of illegitimate story that you heard about that was being spread during the Andrei Chikatilo era?
Right. Well, I mean, not only was it just not really being covered at all, but there was a conspiracy among the community that it was werewolves who were killing all these kids, and media wouldn't say yes or no, so they kind of just let it be. They wouldn't say it's a serial killer. They kind of just let people have their own opinions on it.
Well, for 2 years, it took 2 years for Soviet Russian media to report that there was a killer on the loose, and so that there was one independent killer acting alone, and it wasn't just a series of, you know, of random disappearances.
Right, yeah.
So that is really bold.
Yeah.
And like you said, people did suspect that it could have been werewolves. And also, you pointed this out, I think, in part one, that the interrogation methods at the time led to a lot of false confessions from people who were not involved at the crimes, that were confessing to crimes they didn't commit, that were then attributed to Andrei Chikatilo because they wanted the interrogation to end.
Exactly.
It was really messy, Darren.
It was bad.
And it makes it worse because by 1984, 15 people had died. So he becomes a serial killer in 1981. 3 years, 15 people die. And it's hard not to say that a lot of those deaths could have been avoided had the Soviet media and police work not been more aggressive and transparent.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just running a story saying, you know, there's kids that are being abducted from train stations, I think even that alone probably would have caused people to be more aware of their surroundings and what they're doing. But again, it was just the time.
Yeah, and I think that it's great for us to talk about it. I would encourage you guys to check out this movie called Citizen X. You can find it on YouTube. I don't know if it's legally there on YouTube, but you can find it there on YouTube. Just don't say that I sent you. And they do a really interesting depiction of Andrei Chikatilo, who was arrested at a train station acting suspiciously. And let's take a look at that clip.
Please stand, citizen. Chikatilo. May I have your bag? Citizen Chikatilo, you're under arrest.
So yeah, Andrei Chikatilo was arrested in a train station for suspicious behavior, and in his bag they did find a knife and rope, but he was only in jail for 3 months, and then when he got out, the killing continued, and we're gonna tell you all about it when we come back. Welcome back to Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about Andrei Chikatilo, and in this final part where we are picking up, he has been arrested for suspicious behavior at a train station. They were able to tie him to a theft, so they were able to get him behind bars for 3 months, but Darren, they couldn't tie him to the murder because of a rare blood type. Can you explain a little bit about why they couldn't tie this guy to any of the killings?
Yeah, so at all the killings, obviously there was semen there, and most people, you can get their blood type from any sort of bodily secretion. But with him, he actually had a rare genetic condition in which you can only tell his blood type from an actual blood sample. So you wouldn't be able to match him to it just based on the semen sample.
So what about if he had left a really clear blood sample at one of the crime scenes? You know, maybe if his hand had gotten open, if he had slipped on a knife or something like that. Would that have been enough, or would you need like really a blood sample from the arm, like an IV sort of sample?
So any blood from him, and they would have been able to catch him, but because it was only semen, and the technology back then also wasn't good enough to get. If you were a non-secretor like him, it wasn't good enough to actually get the blood type from the semen. These days, obviously the technology is better, and you can get somebody's blood type even if they are a non-secretor.
So they earnestly thought, Russian authorities earnestly thought that they had just gotten the wrong guy, that he was being suspicious.
Yeah, they're like,
that's
there's
not
no
a crime.
way he doesn't match the blood type, so it can't be him.
Despite being found at the train station where it had already been established that the killer was using public transportation for his kills. He's found there soliciting a minor in a very suspicious and odd way with a knife and a rope.
Yeah.
And that's still, you know, that's not
enough,
a crime.
I guess. Not enough.
So he is behind bars for 3 months, and then when he is released, he promptly kills 2 more women. At this point, more than 20 people had been killed. Yeah, just people were really, really actively losing their lives, and the Russian authorities were absolutely at a loss, especially when you have this guy that seems like he could be a match, and then because of just sort of, would you say that this was that they were inept in the part of the science, or was it just sort of a consequence of the time that that the blood type they weren't able to match it? Like, is it their fault? Is there anyone at fault here, I guess is what I'm asking.
I mean, I'm unsure if they were aware of that rare genetic condition. I mean, only like 15 to 20% of people have that. However, every other piece sort of added up. And sometimes blood evidence or fluid evidence isn't, I mean, obviously in this case, it didn't really help them at all. But I mean, all the other pieces matched up. So yeah, I feel like they're at fault.
So I think it's definitely a little bit of both, because if, you know, they should be aware of blood conditions and blood types when clearing a suspect that is otherwise such a perfect fit.
Yeah.
What they do that does help the case is they enlist the help of psychiatrist Alexander Bukanovsky. And I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name. And he puts together a profile, a forensic profile or a forensic psychological profile of what we can expect from the killer. And that really matches Andrei Chikatilo to a T.
Yeah,
talking
describes
about
him perfectly.
Right. He talks about he would be antisocial, but he could be married. But if he was married, he wouldn't have a sexual relationship.
Right.
That he likely was sexually deviant in his early life. All of this just so perfectly lines up. But what's frustrating is that so much of Chikatilo's earlier sexual deviance isn't on record at that point because the school systems weren't communicating with each other. So that's frustrating. And this really freaks out Chikatilo. He's aware of what the police work is going on around him. At this point, Soviet Russia knows that there is a killer on the loose.
Right.
And so he's avoiding public transportation. He has a little bit of a dry spell, and he only begins killing again in 1988. And this is sort of his final, for lack of a better word, hurrah at killing. He couldn't contain himself anymore. And during this time, 1988, 19 people die in a year, Darren.
Yeah, 19 in a year.
He's gotten so good at killing at this point.
Yeah, he's really got it down to, I mean, again, for lack of a better term, to a science. I mean, for him, he knows exactly what he wants to do, how to do it, where to leave the body, and he doesn't think he's gonna get caught.
Right, and he doesn't think he's gonna get caught, and even though he's no longer using public transportation as much, he's using random victimology that does work in his favor with regards to getting away with these crimes.
Right.
So he's switched his victimology. Most of the people that died during 1988, during this year, are young boys. And again, that comes back to he's killing for pleasure.
Right.
Not for, which gives him sexual gratification, but it no longer aligns with his sexual orientation, which is such an interesting thing about who this guy becomes.
Yeah.
He begins his life early on as this sexual deviant who was so humiliated by his rejection by women. And so women are the victims that he preys on early on. And then when he becomes a killer and he really embodies this evil, then it's just he wants to kill his easiest targets, and those are young boys that he would, lead off with candy or with toys or whatever sort of treats that he was able to lure them with. And then finally, November 6th, 1990, Andrei Chikatilo was spotted acting suspicious because he is covered in blood, walking out of the woods. He isn't arrested though until November 20th, 1990, because they had to put surveillance on him and make sure he's definitely the guy. He's definitely the guy. And what I thought was sort of interesting about how he was first spotted acting suspicious is they see him walking from the woods, and the investigator or the person that spotted him reported to investigators, I thought it was weird that he was walking from the woods because the only people that go into the woods is to forage mushrooms in that area, and he wasn't dressed to forage mushrooms, and therefore it's weird. And then they got closer and they're like, yeah, no, he's not dressed to forage mushrooms, definitely dressed to kill people though. Like super looks like a murderer. So November 20th, 1990, he's apprehended, which is 9 years after his murder spree had begun.
That's so crazy to me because there were so many signs and just like so many things piling up on him that would lead investigators straight to him, but it took him walking out of the woods covered in blood to kind of seal the deal.
Yeah, he slipped through the cracks and had so many lucky breaks with his blood type. That's so frustrating when you read this story as it unfolds, when you read through the case. I kept thinking when I first learned about him, oh, now they're gonna get him, now they're gonna get him. And I was so confused when I heard about when his execution was. That's so strange, it's so late. They must have caught him within the first 4 years. No. Just such a mishandling of affairs that went down here. I think absolutely it does come down to a mishandling across departments.
Definitely.
But he's apprehended, he's put on trial, and his trial becomes really eerie and reminiscent of sort of a circus. A silver lining to this case, at least for the peace and the closure of the victims and families, is that he does open up. I don't know if that would give me closure, and that's something I've talked about a little bit before on this show. I don't know if I'd want to know, but he does talk. And he talks to the guy that did his profile that helped police to apprehend him. Yeah, Alexander Bukanovsky becomes sort of his confidant. And he claims that Andre Chikatilo claims he's killed 56 people, but we can only verify 53. I don't know that it necessarily matters. He's still a monster either way. It's not like the extra 3 gets him a record or something.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me that he basically opened the floodgates when the psychiatrist, was talking to him and just told him everything about every single person that he killed. It's almost as if he was like kind of waiting to tell somebody about his like murderous feats, as if he was proud of it or something.
Yeah, and also what's interesting is that he was a little bit coy with authorities at first, and he did maintain his innocence for a time, but something about Alexander Bukanovsky, who did put this profile together and who understood him so completely even before he met him, and you see this odd relationship develop where Andre does want to talk to Alexander about what he has done, and he reenacts the murders on mannequins, which is very creepy. He takes them to murder sites that they had yet to have discovered. And to me, it's the way that he was able to keep track of all these murder sites is really unsettling, because again, I think we talked about this in part 1. This was a smart guy. This was not a stupid guy. And we talked about Ed Gein on the show before, and that was a dumb killer. He was, maybe an infamous killer, but he was stupid. But Andre Chikatilo, what's so stomach turning about him is that he was really smart, and he was able to get away with way more murders than the authorities initially even thought.
Yeah, I think at the time when he was talking to the psychiatrist, the police didn't even know how many there were. I think around that time they thought like 36, or like mid-30s, and then he confessed to even more than that and showed them where the bodies were.
Right.
So I think it even surprised them.
And it would get more and more surprising because his trial is so bizarre and captures the attention of Russia and the world over. So let's go to a clip right now of exactly what we're talking about with this circus of a trial.
On the morning of April 14th, 1992, in the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, citizens flooded the steps of the House of Justice, anxious for a glimpse of the accused killer, Andre Chikatilo. For months, newspaper headlines had branded him the Red Ripper or the Butcher of Rostov. Chikatilo was dressed in a souvenir Olympic sports shirt provided by the court. His head had been shaved, a standard procedure to guard against lice. As proceedings began, the setting resembled a circus more than a murder trial.
He was in a large iron cage in the courtroom. The cage was to protect him from the rage of the parents of the victims.
He was never able to sit at a table and converse with his lawyer the way a Western defendant would have been.
So yeah, it was a really bizarre scene, and he went on to give about a 2-hour testimony at his trial that was just all over the place, and he blamed a lot of people for who he had become, although he did accept responsibility for what he was accused of. Can you talk a little bit about what he said was to blame for who he was and why he became a murderer?
Yeah, I mean, he blamed Russia, he blamed Stalin, he blamed the government. He said that famine and just how he grew up in such poverty and with no food, he literally blamed the government for his problems.
And I think that's why it captured the nation's attention in such a profound way, was because they knew what the struggle had been under Stalin, and they knew what so many of them had gone through and struggled through. And yet they'd gone through the other side without becoming a serial killer.
Right.
And so to see someone manifest this deep hurt and mistreatment and government just absolutely destroying its own people, waging war almost against its own people, and that he was like, I am the embodiment of that. That evil created me was, I think, really strange for people to look at, because so many other Soviet Russians were saying, okay, but I'm not a serial killer.
Yeah.
And, you know, I see a lot of your logic. I agree with you. It was bad. We hated it. Stalin fucking sucked, man. Yeah. But you don't become a serial killer.
Exactly.
But his excuse, or at least his his testimony did resonate with people. It's really strange to watch. He also whipped his dick out.
Casual, you know.
Just casual, because on top of saying that I was a creation of, you know, these government practices and malpractices against its own people, also impotence and his rejection by his mother and then by women as well, all sort of played into his storytelling of who he had become. So there's that, and it was just such a strange and gross trial.
It was strange, and I think he was trying to play up that he was crazy so that he wouldn't get the death penalty. So I think he really wanted to, I mean, not necessarily embellish, but just make things sound.
I think you can use the word embellish. Yeah. I think that he definitely exaggerated a great deal of what he told the Russian people. I think an example of that is what we talked about in part 1, that whether or not he had a brother, and if he did his mom really tell him that his brother was murdered and cannibalized as like a bedtime story?
Yeah.
The only record that we have of that being true is his own testimony.
Right.
So it's makes you wonder, is that just a dramatic embellishment, a lie to gain sympathy from the Russian people so that you would avoid the death penalty?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely was trying anything he could to avoid the death penalty. I mean, when he took down his pants, I mean, who wouldn't think somebody like that is, you know, a little bit challenged or, you know, has some sort of mental problem.
Right. And then to blame it on the government as well really garners that sympathy too. What I do think is interesting is that I don't really know exactly how Russian prisons were in the 1990s and the early 1990s. I would imagine not great.
Not the best, probably.
It's interesting that he was trying not to get the death penalty because he was so vilified and hated by the Russian people following, you know, when all these accusations came out and when there was a mountain of evidence against him. I'm surprised that he would have probably been killed even worse behind bars. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
He was, you know, enemy number 1 in Russia when this was all going down. But he does get the death penalty. All of his antics do not work in the courtroom, and he is shot in the back of the head on Valentine's Day in 1994.
So we were alive and well then.
We were 4 years old.
Yeah, it's so crazy to think about.
That's
that
so
this
crazy.
Prolific serial killer was, you know, kind of there during our lifetime. You know, there's not many serial killers that I can think of that were like very prominent in our lifetime. I mean, they don't come along very often.
Yeah, well, thank God for that,
Thank
Darren.
God for that.
So that's the story of Andrei Chikatilo, and he is probably one of the most prolific serial killers that we've covered on this show. What are the themes, when you think about Andrei Chikatilo, how would you sum up how you remember him, how you learned about him, what your research has taught you about him?
I mean, I think a lot about his story has to do with where he was growing up at the time. And I think that had a huge impact on his childhood and how he grew up. And not only that, with the government, with the state-run media, that had a huge impact on him not getting caught. So I think the overarching theme is how the government there really sort of extended the period where he was able to kill.
They certainly were not helpful in a timely resolution to solving this murder cases, multiple cases. I think that for me, what it comes down to is that, you know, we're talking about 53, potentially 56 people who lost their lives at the hands of Andrei Chikatilo. And it's frustrating when we talk about cases on this show that I feel like we're not going to be able to tell everyone's story.
Right.
And I really would urge you guys to do your own independent research as well as watch our show.
Yeah.
And what can you guys learn from this? And because we can only scratch the surface. We only have like an hour of your time. And there's so many other stories in here, especially with the state-run media, that I think is so interesting to dive into, and how he was able to abduct these transients at the time, and why were there so many transients at train stations that were moving around? Where were the opportunities in Soviet Russia? There's just so much to dive into. So I really urge you guys to keep the conversation going in the comments section below. And if you want any exclusive content from Murder with Friends, we have a whole bunch of episodes that we actually haven't put out there yet on YouTube. Head over to tytnetwork.com/join. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate all the support, and I'll see you next time on Murder with Friends.
Sugar, spice, everything nice, and a fourth thing, there's a new Powerpuff Girl.
actually okay, so she's a little bit different. She does contain sugar, spice, and everything nice, but also something else.
Paprika.
Yes, she's so spicy and smoked, but also chemical W, which could contain paprika. Here is a look of her from the new Powerpuff Girls movie.
Sisters, 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 sisters.
Did you miss the reveal of the 4th Powerpuff Girl?
Check this out.
Meet
List.
She's so cool. She's bigger because she's older. She's supposed to be like a teenager. And she decidedly looks like a different race than the other girls. Her hair is different. She's just different all around. She shows up after a mystery, spoiler alert, in the movie, which you can watch via the Cartoon Network app, as it was said in the video. She was created years ago by the professor when he was working to defeat this other professor who made the perfect little boy who could fly around and stuff, and he wanted to make a girl that could fly farther and do other stuff. But he mixed in chemical W on accident. I don't know why it's called chemical W, but that's why she looks a little different, I think, and her powers involve telekinesis and shooting out energy blasts. However, she can't control her emotions so well, so she's lived on Bird Poop Island for years. And
just
has recently
because that's
come back.
a thing.
Yes.
Bird Poop Island.
Sure. It's
so
a
quaint.
cartoon.
I heard the weather there's lovely this time of year.
Well, it's mostly crap. And so she's been sitting there and exploding and just messing up the bird poop on Bird Poop Island. And that's her thing. I don't know if she'll be part of the show because it does look like, spoiler alert again, she leaves at the end of the movie.
Well, I hope, it seems like they've made it to where she can come back and forth, you know, like can continue to be a reoccurring character. Because I think it's kind of nice to have an additional character that's a little different from the rest of the girls.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying like, hey, you know, we know all of you out there who are fans may not necessarily fit into the demo of what Buttercup, Blossom, and the third one,
Bubbles.
And we're recognizing you.
Poor Bubbles.
I forgot her.
And then there's Maud.
So I kind of like that they're doing that. I haven't seen the movie yet personally. I've only seen clips from it. So that's up in the air as far as I'm concerned of whether it's good. What do you think of the new Powerpuff Girl?
I just, I'm a big fan of animation and cartoons regardless. So, you know, just getting any type of new movies or reboots or anything like that is very exciting. And I don't know, I think she looks pretty badass. She has the blue hair, you know, which I think is cool. You know, she's a little bit older, and I hope they don't just like go into the demographic of like, you know, she can't control her temper and she can't, you know, this and that. I hope that they build her up to be like some kind of hero.
Yeah,
for
I
it,
saw that and I thought, why did you make the brown one not able to control her temper? I don't know if I love that.
I've heard some comments about that. But at the same time, you know, maybe they'll make a way to work around that and to make it to her advantage, like make her flaw the actual thing that like saves the day. That's what I kind of like about.
I think they may have been trying to do a framing device of why she's not there, and that's what they came up with. Maybe, you know, Bird Poop Island is where you go if you can't control your feelings, so control your feelings, I guess. Audience, what do you think of the 4th Powerpuff Girl? Please let us know below, and please like and subscribe for more. It has been terrifying people across the country, and by it, I mean It the movie, just to be completely clear, but there was one scene that was so scary, it had to be cut from even that. Bum, bum, bum. This comes from the star, well, a star, Bill Skarsgård, who plays Pennywise.
I mean, the star.
Well, he is the titular character.
Yeah, actually, the kids were the stars of that movie for sure.
The kids are always the stars of our lives.
They stole the show on that one.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So
anyway.
Speaking in an interview with Variety, Bill Skarsgård talked out about the scene that had to be cut. There's a scene that we shot that was a flashback scene from the 1600s where Pennywise was before Pennywise, and we shot it for additional shooting, and the scene turned out really, really disturbing. And it's me. I'm not the clown. I look more like myself. I'm not gonna spoil what the scene was because we might use it in the sequel, but it's a very disturbing scene. Sort of a backstory for what it or where Pennywise came from. The idea is that it, the entity, was dormant or resting for thousands and thousands of years, and it, the scene, hints on the founding of Derry.
Am I the only one that when reading that,
it's so confusing.
I literally go, oh, they're talking about IT. Oh no, it the movie, it, not
IT.
I know, I'm
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
I was like, oh no, I need to call and get help with my computer. It's crashing. But back to the clown. In my opinion, I actually like backstory scenes and like scenes where they show how like characters before they become what they are. Like those are my favorite type. So I really hope, I love that. I really hope we get to see that. And we never got to see that in the in the old mini series with Tim Curry, or I don't even think they go through it in the book. I haven't read the book in such a long time that I could be wrong. But to have like a backstory scene where you get to see Pennywise before
the clown,
it becomes it and the creature, and I don't know, like I really want to see it, even if they put it on the extra features or.
Well, they might use it for the sequel, he says.
That's fine.
But what it or Pennywise is supposed to be, I looked it up, and he's supposed to be this timeless entity that has always existed and is the enemy of another timeless entity that has always existed in Stephen King's universe, which is the turtle, and the turtle is good, and Pennywise is bad, and it's just like they've always kind of been omnipresent with beyond humanity even, so it's just something that exists there.
What I always thought of for it is fear itself, like it is fear itself, and that's why it feeds off of fear and thrives on fear, and why it hunts mostly children, because children are so easy to.
Well, some people actually have theorized that this scene that Bill Skarsgård is describing came from the original script from Cary Fukunaga, set in the early 17th century. This comes from Tumblr, by the way. The scene shows a mother allowing the It monster to devour her daughter in exchange for safety. And according to Digital Spy, this scene also featured a Pennywise unlike the one seen by the kids in the movie, describing it as a incomplete, flesh pale, and translucent, like a half-formed imitation of a human. So maybe in that transition between the entity or the idea of fear becoming a physical thing.
And I feel like with it has to take a form that people would
understand,
not even understand, but like derive as trusting, or even though I don't trust clowns.
No one does.
I used to date one. Oh no.
What?
Yeah, I used to date a circus clown. It's okay. We're still friends. It's cool.
Okay.
But, I don't. I mean, there's no reson why. I guess
I shouldn't have been so insulting. I'm sorry.
I mean, it was cool. No, but he dumped me for a mime. In any case, now we're getting into my backstory. We can fix this in post, right? So with it, I think it has to take a form that everyone is familiar with, and and I feel like maybe when it discovers that like circus and seeing like Pennywise the dancing clown, like seeing all of everyone. I don't know. I'm just making my own script now, but like seeing all the people being drawn to Pennywise, and seeing like the joy and the laughter coming from that. I feel like taking that form in a more trusting thing, to be able to feed off of others would be a good idea.
No, that is a good theory. I know you're like, ooh, about
like,
it, but
words are hard.
Theory. This is we talk about fan theories all the time, and that is one. Audience, where do you think this movie would have been if we included that scene? I kind of like it better without the scene, because the more I know about something, the less scared I am of it.
Oh, that makes sense.
But I mean, I could be scared of fear. Aren't we all? Audience, would it be better with that scene, or is it better without? Please let us know what you think below, and please like and subscribe for more. Verizon is cutting off 8,500 rural customers for reasons that they say include them going over their data use substantially. However, that may not really be the case. So Verizon has disconnected 8,500 customers with 19,000 lines in 13 states, including Alaska, Idaho, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, Maine, Michigan, Missouri, Montana, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Utah, and Wisconsin, for reasons that they were saying that these people in these areas under their rural LTE network were roaming so much that it was costing them too much that it would no longer be profitable. This is an actual letter that Verizon sent out to one of the affected customers in Verizon's LTE Rural America program, saying, during a recent review of customer accounts, we discovered you are using a significant amount of data while roaming off the Verizon wireless network. While we appreciate you choosing Verizon, after October 17th, 2017, we will no longer offer service to the numbers listed above since your primary place of use is outside the Verizon service area. They go on to say that if you don't change your number before this time, you're going to lose your number forever. So sorry, thanks, K-bye. There is no recourse also to continue using Verizon after this.
You know what's horrible too is that I'm sure in a lot of those places where they're at, they probably don't have service with any carrier. I mean, if it's that rural, I mean, it might be really difficult for them to have any type of service. So the fact that Verizon's just cutting the cord, it's like, man, that really, you know, I have unlimited data, and Lord knows I use a lot. So I'm very grateful that I do not live in any of these areas, because I would be one of the first ones to go, that's for sure.
I'm sorry, that's how it looks like it is, because there are smaller carriers out there that Verizon partners with the roaming that you could possibly use. People who were affected by this did report to Ars Technica that the service is pretty bad. One customer actually says that even though her letter said she was using substantial data, she and her family never used more than 50 gigs of data across 4 lines, despite having a, quote, unlimited data plan. She went on to say, now we are left with very few choices, none of them with good service. I guess small town America means nothing to these people. It's okay though, I live in a small town, I know a lot of people, and I'm telling every one of them to steer clear of Verizon.
Yeah, 50 gigabytes among 4 people.
That's not that much.
That's not a lot at all. And the fact that, so it feels like Verizon's just sending out this letter as an excuse to just kind of, you know, cut the cord, just you know,
so I guess unlimited data isn't really as advertised, at least in these areas. It did claim that people who stay within specific cities wouldn't be affected by this. It seems to be, it's a little spotty. Yeah.
Well, I don't have Verizon, so I'm safe, and I don't live in Maine, so I'm good.
I mean, it just sucks, especially when we're looking at not just wireless carriers, but internet service providers, where you might be very limited as to what companies you can even work with in certain areas. So if they drop you, what can you do? I think we're at this point now where wireless and internet services are more of a necessity than a luxury. You need it very much.
It's part of everyday use, and it's part of most people's jobs and work and everything. So it's like an everyday,
and even just necessities.
Exactly.
So this sucks. I'm sorry. There's no real way for me to fix this or button it up otherwise.
We can fix it. Let's go.
Let's go.
Come on,
save
we're gonna go
save
it. I'm gonna put up my own, what's it called? Tower.
For now, I mean, as she said, they have very few options, and there isn't much to do with that. So, audience, what are your thoughts on this data cut from the rural program, and could it happen to us? Please let us know your thoughts on NerdAlertTYT on Twitter and Facebook. For those of you who thought you'd have more time to go to the Upside Down, which is the Stranger Things bar in New York, too bad, it's ending. Netflix has decided to pull the plug on the Upside Down, but they did it in a really cool way, so maybe this is a lesson to all of us on how to let people down.
I mean, if you're gonna get shut down, it might as well be like this. It's pretty cool.
So the bar operates on Logan Square. And in the letter to the people renting the bar, Netflix said, look, I don't want you to think I'm a total wasteoid, and I love how much you guys love the show, but unless I'm living in the Upside Down, I don't think we did a deal with you for this pop-up.
Whoa.
Which is a little harsh as well. You're obviously creative types, so I'm sure you can appreciate that it's important to us to have a say in how our fans encounter the worlds we build. We're not gonna go full Dr. Brenner on you, but we ask that you please not extend the pop-up beyond its 6-week run, ending in September, and reach out to us for permission if you plan to do this once again. So it's kind of a cool.
I think that was a cool way of telling them to say, hey, back off. Because there's pop-up bars are becoming so popular now, especially with different like different themes, different movies, different, all type of different genres. And the fact that, if you don't notify, I guess if you do something where you're using a property that's copyrighted or whatnot, you know, the creators can definitely come after you.
I mean,
that's a big problem.
Because, I mean, Disneyland, Disney parks, they won't allow adults to come in wearing the costumes of the characters because they already have hired adults in those characters, and they don't want someone to misrepresent them or be like, hi, I'm Princess Ariel.
I am Merida.
Do you want some cocaine? You know, it's just, that's not a good representation
that's taking it to a level.
of the Disney brand. It could happen, and that's why it's not allowed. Because of people who never,
Darn Tinkerbell and her cocaine habits, man. But yes, no, the fact that Stranger Things is so popular right now, and also I'm sure they don't want, you know, I'm sure it's very successful to where anything that they do within the bar, you know, Netflix is not getting a percentage of that. They're not getting cut of that, to where if they extend it longer, you know, towards Halloween and like bank on the fact that the new season's coming out. I mean, it is kind of, you know, it was really cool of Netflix to not be like, hey guys,
stop it now and we're
stop it now, and here's also a lawsuit and have a nice day.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a trend now. I mean, there was the Tim Burton bar and restaurant recently.
The Cantina.
Scum and Villainy is still running, and I think it's just not using copyrighted material enough that it's allowed to be there. It's a pretty cool experience, though you won't find, you know, a lot of stalwart Star Wars trademarks in there. Actually, none. There's no trademark material in there. So it's just like a fine line of being a fan and having an homage, yes, and you know, you're also turning a profit, and you're also clearly making that profit off of someone else's IP.
Yeah, and this isn't the Upside Down. I mean, you know, you can't just run and hide.
I thought the letter was cool, but now that I read it, I feel like it reminds me of Steve Buscemi in 30 Rock being like, hello, fellow kids, I'm cool too, you know, and then he's really
like trying to be like the cool uncle, like, I can relate to you guys starting up your bar. Like, yeah, let's go out for a whiskey, but before we do that, let's shut you down.
It is cool to not be sued, though.
Yeah,
so, okay.
I think they did it in a very fun
I'll
way.
give them that.
And they put enough like show references in the letter to where, you know, it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
They knew it was gonna get posted. They knew it was gonna
for sure.
It was gonna be
the owners of the Upside Down bar, specifically Jared Saul, the manager, says, if Netflix were okay with us running the Upside Down project through the season 2 premiere in the Halloween weekend, we would most definitely have continued this incredible party a little bit longer. But it looks like there are no hard feelings with this, or maybe some light hard feelings, but it is what it is. Audience, if you want to see the bar, you have through October 1st to do so. Do you think it's fair for them to shut down the bar? And is it fair for other companies to shut down tribute bars as well? Please let us know at NerdAlertTYT on Facebook and Twitter. Apple released Face ID for their new iPhones, and it looks like a very interesting technical premise, but could it lead to some issues with privacy and security? Motherboard from Vice talked to a few different security experts about whether or not we should be worried about this or if we should embrace the technology, because with new technology comes new questions and some new legal precedents as well. I mean, in the past we've had some issues with touch unlock even, but with the face it's even easier, so that does present its own unique problems. There are some things you may be worried about, like for instance, could Apple create a unique facial recognition database? Could they use that information for someone else? Could the database be stored with a third party, which is not maybe as secure as Apple or as committed?
Will it work on identical twins? Like, I mean, if like you know, you're like keeping information from like your twin brother, and he's like, aha, I have the same face. I'm gonna unlock this right now.
I would say if
that's
you were
crazy.
A twin, don't use face unlock.
Yeah, right. Identical.
An identical twin.
Yeah.
If you're fraternal, it might be fine. The thing is, though, we don't know answers to that question because we don't have it yet. There's also the question if someone can make a 3D printed mask and if it would work. My gut is yes, but until we have the phones, it's hard to know.
Here's a very important question. I mean, I'm obviously a pretty badass individual. What if I get into a really bad bar fight? You know, like a typical Tuesday for me, and then like my face is all swollen. I have a bloody nose. I got a black eye. You know, obviously this is going to happen to me because I get into bar fights.
Are you getting
like every other week? You know, like I gotta break the bottle and go after them. Obviously, I'm very good at bar fights. You should see the other person.
Am I if there's
That's what I'm I'm worried about. Like, if I get into a bar fight, will my phone recognize me? Like, oh man, I gotta call someone to pick me up. This is really bad. And then I like try and unlock it. And I'm like, come on, man. Oh, and my face is just too swollen.
The selfie camera utilizes true depth camera system, which is sensors and a dot projector, which should be able to recognize you if you change your hair or if you wear glasses. I don't know what will happen if your face is swollen. There's glass shards embedded in it. We don't know yet. I guess maybe someone will find that out after the phones come out.
My bar fighting days are over, is what this is all boiling down to.
I think they should be for many reasons.
Oh, what?
They were also asking if there are any obvious privacy arguments for moving to Face ID over Touch ID. Should we give Apple the benefit of the doubt? According to them, the Touch ID had a 1 in 50,000, according to Apple, chance of unlocking with the wrong fingerprint, whereas Face ID has a 1 in 1 million error rate. So it seems like along those parameters, it's less unsecure.
When it scans you, can you do a face like a? I mean, and that way, every time you have to unlock it, you have to do that face, because that would be pretty great.
Sensors might be able to put it together.
Oh man, I'm just trying to find loopholes. I'm just gonna get it.
Mess this up,
I'm just gonna get it to see if I can like break the system.
I mean, that's what QA is for.
Yeah. So we got to go get in a bar fight when this comes out. See if it works. Okay.
So from a legal standpoint, it looks like Face ID is similar to Touch ID. There doesn't seem to be a strong difference. However, there's a big question of whether law enforcement can force you to open your iPhone with your face.
See, that's where the face would come in handy, because I'll be like, oh, it's not working, it's not working. And then like they look away and I'm like, aha, I got it.
Well,
is that not
I mean, it looks like courts disagree on what exactly from what self-incrimination means. So they've ruled that they can't compel you to give up your passwords, but giving up a fingerprint like Touch ID is not a form of testimony. Therefore, it's not subject to Fifth Amendment protections. The same could be argued by your face. As I said recently, from a legal standpoint, the analyses show that face and touch sensor are kind of the same in terms. This is all very murky, is what I walked away with from this. Law enforcement does need a warrant on probable cause to get you to open your phone. However, you could worry about what if they just hold your phone in front of your face. That's a little bit worrisome.
And I'm passed out from a bar fight and they just...
Or you're just sitting in the chair and they go, look over here, look over here.
Like, no.
No, Fifth Amendment.
I'm not ready for my close-up, no.
The government can compel you to produce passwords and signatures or even blood, but not engage in a testimonial act, which may incriminate you. Under a traditional analysis, you could be required to open your phone with your face because it is not a testimonial act. I think there will need to be many different trial and error cases, unfortunately, to figure out where we are with this.
There's a lot of gray area in that one.
It really is. In 2014, a Virginia judge ruled that police can force people to unlock their devices with their fingerprints. 2 years later, a judge in a district court in California issued a warrant to allow cops to use a person's fingerprint to open an iPhone. Earlier this year, a federal judge in Illinois denied a warrant demanding that everyone in a Lancaster, California building attempt to unlock an encrypted phone with their fingerprint. Wow. I mean, there isn't really a lot of designated answers to this. It's still super murky, and it's probably going to get murkier with the ease of holding a phone in front of someone's face. Maybe if you shut your eyes, maybe if you squint, like Bonnie said, put your hair in front.
What if you're like lying in bed and it's really dark and you want to like look at something on your phone and you're trying to unlock it and there's no light and you're like, oh, this is horrible.
Well, you could also enable password.
I'm too lazy for that. I'm like, unlock.
In iOS 11, you could push the power button 5 times rapidly, and that would disable Touch ID and Face ID. So you could do that if you're in a weird situation where that would be necessary. I feel like I think this might be a thing with couples outside the legal standpoint, or like if one of them's sleeping, they could be like this and then read their text and stuff.
I didn't even think about that.
Discover some.
Whoa! Oh man.
So yeah,
I was just thinking bar fights. I didn't even think about that.
You were thinking about punching, not discovering someone's secrets, which is what I want to do.
Status. Oh dear. Okay. Not giving you my phone.
No, don't. I wouldn't. As your friend, I wouldn't.
Okay.
Audience, do you think that the Face ID recognition system will be harmful or helpful in the future? Please let us know at NerdAlertTYT on Facebook and on Twitter. Researchers think they've discovered the answer to the troll problem. How do you stop trolls? It looks like it kind of works when you ban them, surprisingly. So this was regarding Reddit. So a couple years ago, Reddit famously shut down subreddits. In particular, the study looks at two, one called Fat People Hate, one called Coontown. One is obviously racist and one is also a very hate-filled and judgmental site. Both of these subreddits seem to be very, very toxic environments with no other purpose except for being horrible in general, and they were both shut down. So certain researchers conducted in the Georgia Institute of Technology, Emory University, and the University of Michigan decided to examine this, taking data from 100 million Reddit posts that were created before and after the subreddits were dissolved. So in the journal they conclude that the 2015 ban did work. So what they did, it was follow what these users did after the subreddits were banned compared to what they had done before. So they extracted words from the banned subreddits to create a data set that included hate speech and community-specific lingo, racist argumentation, slurs, words that contributed to shaming, words that were connected to the practice of posting hateful comments. And according to the researchers, the data showed that following the ban, many more accounts discontinued their use of the site than expected. So,
well, because most trolls, all they're wanting is attention. So if they're just posting and they just want that, they want to stir the pot, they want that attention, even if it's negative attention. They're like just craving that, to where if they get banned or if people just stop responding altogether, like there's nothing for them to do. They're just like, well, and they gotta go do something, like they gotta go garden or something.
I mean, it's possible you have other interests besides being a hateful, horrible person.
Yeah, gardening.
Because that's not, I don't think that's an effective use of time, but I'm not everyone. According to the researchers, 33% of the users of Fat People Hate and 41% of the users from Coontown became inactive or deleted their accounts. Users who stayed decreased what the study authors defined as hate speech on other subreddits by at least 80%. And when they migrated onto other subreddits, those communities didn't see a significant increase in hate speech. However, according to the researchers, instead of spreading the hatred and infection and toxicity of hate speech to the rest of Reddit, they found other subreddits that are already high in hate speech, including the Donald, Black Crime Matters, and weirdly, a number of seemingly harmless TV groups like Mr. Robot, Homeland, and Fargo TV saw an influx of users from those hate groups, although not an influence of hate speech. So I guess they did have other interests that didn't involve being terrible.
It's like, oh, I can't write on here. I'm gonna go watch Mr. Robot and then be angry about that.
Show,
it is a good show.
Okay.
But no, one of my biggest things I'd always tell people is don't feed the trolls. Like, don't feed the trolls. Just block them. Don't even respond. Just ignore them. Don't read the comments. I mean, they're gonna keep spewing it, and just it's pointless.
It did seem to kind of work. However, it's just, you have to remember Reddit is one site, right? So after this, they did find that some users took to other social media sites like Vote, Snapzoo, and Impeopled, which are not sites that I'm familiar with
I have
personally.
never heard of any of those.
No.
Oh my.
But they did discover that 1,536 of the Fat People Hate users had the exact usernames on vote.co, and it once again engaged in their hate speech of both similar subreddits.
But if some, I mean, you can always argue like the freedom of speech argument, but in all honesty, like if some of these sites, if it goes against their terms of use and their mission statement, I mean, they're more than capable of just of banning you.
I mean,
I feel like sites like Twitter and other things like that should kind of take a hint on that.
I think, especially with Reddit, they definitely have the control of being able to define what their site is about.
Sure.
Right. So even though you could say free speech is not a term that applies to private companies. It applies to the government that would protect you from being persecuted.
And there's also nothing there's nothing. If you can't write on their sites, fine. Go and start your own site. If that's,
what
the thing.
they
like,
did.
That's what they did. Oh.
Well, they went to other sites that still allowed it.
Right.
But I think
saying,
Reddit is, Reddit is a major website. These other ones are smaller. So
yeah,
I think
I've never heard of any of these.
If you really wanted to engage in hate speech constantly, you would find a way. But it did look like that a lot of people didn't rate it as one of their most chief interests, so they stopped doing it, or at least found another way to vent whatever issues they have.
Can't we all just get along, like hold hands, sing kumbaya?
I think that's the main answer, which is, do you need to do this at all? Is it necessary? What underlying problems do you have that you feel you need to do this? But of course, that's not going to be a blanket solution to whatever issues are at hand. So it kind of worked, but it kind of didn't. Audience, what do you think the solution is to stopping trolls? And I don't mean, cute trolling. I mean very toxic, hateful trolling. Please let me know on NerdAlertTYT on Twitter and on Facebook. Researchers have found that there are 4 essential types of Facebook users. So the question is, which one are you? So this research was recently published by people from Brigham Young University, and nope, these are all Brigham Young University. So you can read the abstract yourself online. But basically what it boils down to is that this research believes there are 4 types of people who use the massively popular social networking site Facebook. And those types are the selfie, the town crier, the window shopper, and the relationship builder. And somehow the 2 billion people who use Facebook all fit into one of these 4 categories according to the research. So let's break down what these are exactly. And maybe you could figure out which one you are.
I think I know which one. I think I'm a little bit of a mix between 2, but explain them first, and then I'll explain why.
So the first one is called Gryffindor. No, the first.
I'm a Hufflepuff. I know this one. This one's easy. Hufflepuff.
The selfie is more about self-promotion. So the people who are in this group are taking photographs of themselves, broadcasting incessantly, using this for promotion. There's no ceiling on how many likes, comments, or attention that these people are seeking. I know I'm phrasing it in a really negative way, but it isn't necessarily. I would say most celebrity pages are in this group. There's the relationship builders. They use Facebook kind of like how you would interact with someone socially in real life. So you would post things, respond to others, engage in debates, conversations, build connections online, build with people you already know, keeping in touch with old friends, making new friends, extension. It's an extension of their real life, essentially. So I would say that's probably most people, but I don't know that at all. Town criers are the opposite of that. So they kind of view themselves as the people who needed to alert other people about news or things that are happening in real life and virtual life. So instead of focusing on themselves in a personal way, they see themselves as needing to share articles, comments on current events, and announce major events to the world as soon as they possibly can. All of LA turns into this when there's an earthquake, just so you know. And lastly, there are window shoppers, which are kind of not like the other 3 at all. They're more observers. So it's a more passive experience where you're just looking at posts, reading them, kind of taking different things away from what people are saying or posting themselves, observing behaviors. So you're kind of there, but you're not interacting. Like you're a lurker, basically. That's a nicer way.
Well, that's a creepy way of putting it.
I lurk on Reddit. I never post on Reddit, but I read a lot of stuff and I absorb a lot of information. So there you go.
Well, there you go. You're a lurker.
On Reddit.
On Reddit.
On Facebook, I think I'm more of a relationship builder, but I would like to be more of a selfie person because you gotta promote yourself, and I don't like doing it, but it's necessary.
That's what I feel. I feel like I'm a mix between selfie and relationship builder because being in this industry, you have to be a selfie Facebook user because, I mean, not meaning like taking selfies all the time, which I do, but I meant like, like you have to constantly be promoting yourself, and it is exhausting. It's I use Facebook for a lot of, different work purposes. But the relationship builder is ultimately why I keep Facebook, because you know, I keep in touch with my family and my friends. And my grandmother would kill me if I got rid of my Facebook.
How else would you know when anyone's birthday is?
Oh, that too. That's so helpful. I'm so bad with dates. I'm like, oh, is it your birthday? It's like, Bonnie, my birthday's not until January. I'm like, I'm so close.
I still wish you well.
Yeah, I wish you well.
Day and all days.
I wish you well when your birthday comes around in 7 months.
But I think these are all broad and vague enough that maybe you could actually cram 2 billion people into these 4 different groups.
I mean, you can put everyone into 4 Hogwarts houses, so why not?
I feel like I'm a blend of 2 houses, though.
See,
so
but you can be a blend in here too. Like,
yeah,
you can be multi.
I did take a quiz that was just like, which 2 houses are you and which is your dominant? And it was just like, I like this quiz. It's more nuanced, as we all are.
Kind of brings it all together.
Well, yeah. It's not really a personality divider itself. It's more like, how do you handle Facebook? So audience, how do you handle Facebook? Which of the 4 groups in this research do you think you are? Please let us know on Nerd Alert TYT on Facebook and Twitter. Americans are swearing more than ever. Why is that? Are we coarser? Are we worse? No. So I'm sure that was bleeped out, and I'm just gonna say, yeah, it's gonna probably be bleeped out, but you'll still know exactly what I was saying due to context.
Damn it! I'm so glad I'm used in this one.
I don't think damn it is a swear word.
Is it? Oh, well, hold on. I'll think of more.
Okay,
Don't worry.
Okay. A new study by San Diego University psychologist Jean M. Twenge suggests that the increased swearing in modern years, or more recent years, is not due to a decline in morals and values, but rather a growth of individualism, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So her team searched the Google database to see how the use of Carlin's, you may remember the famous 7 words you're not allowed to say on television from George Carlin. So they followed those 7 words in particular to see how they changed from 1950 to 2008 for this particular study. So what they found was a large trend more towards self-expression and individualism, which I don't think is a bad thing.
I will say everyone should read this article just for the description of the curse words in itself. Instead of listing the words, they describe the words, which is funny to me. I think it's funny.
I'm not really offended by any of these words because I don't think they're meant to harm anyone in particular. I mean, what do we have? Mother, sucker, shit, crap. Nope, not crap. They're not even listed in this article, so it's up to you to go get it to yourself.
I hope that was all like beep, 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 like a Morse code. It's like beep, 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 beep. You just like said save our ship or something.
Yeah, sure. I think it's fun. That's fun too. So what they were looking at in this particular part was American books since 1950. So seeing the word mother in the 1950s was not very common, but it appears 678 times more often now. There are 65 possibly less offensive replacements for and it has around it appears 168 times more often than it did in the 1950s. Shit, which I don't know if it's available through context what I've just said, but turd, poop, you know, it emerged 69 times as often, and no, that is not a joke.
I mean, now we have a whole movie about a poop emoji, so I mean...
Yeah, but that movie sucks and shouldn't exist.
I know, I'm aware. I didn't even watch it.
But this is not, you know, we're not all terrible. When back in my day, we were better people. No, it's not like that necessarily.
My inner sailor comes out every now and then, you know? Like,
well, maybe it is, because I don't find these things very profane, personally. Yeah. I mean, if these words are used more and more, we're going to be more used to them, and we're not going to care as much. And maybe we'll come up with new swear words, and there will be a new set that we can't say on television.
Frickin' frack!
Oh, no, that's only in BSG.
Oh, that's right. That was the name of my computer. Because anytime my computer would crash, I'd be like, frickin' frack.
Perfect.
And so that was the name of my laptop.
So you could talk
to
it more.
Yeah.
But people are doing things that are more self-expressive. One is giving their children unique names instead of, John or Jane.
Oh, I thought they were calling their kids like shit and
No. I'm talking about
little
self-expression. So it is kind of a break from, it's different. It's a decline in social taboo, and it's more about expressing yourself as opposed to falling more into conventional standards. So
I kind of want to name my kid that now.
Maybe you should think about that first. It's just more individualistic language in general, and the culture has shifted more towards freedom, self-expression. I think that's good because what's the point of obeying rules and social constructs that don't exist anymore? Even I don't get it. I do get a lot of comments though from older people who don't appreciate the way I talk, and that's just your opinion, man. I disagree.
Beep, beep, beep.
Audience, are you offended by any of George Carlin's 7 words you can't say? Please let us know why at NerdAlertTYT on Facebook and on Twitter.
Bye.
And swear words. Google has taken a stab at stopping clinical depression, and some people say this is a great thing, but some therapists are saying it's awful. So recently, within the past few weeks actually, Google announced that it teamed up with a mental health advocacy group to address the epidemic of depression. And people who type the words clinical depression into Google search on their mobile devices are now presented automatically with a link to a screening questionnaire to assess whether or not they are depressed. And this is just one company's steps. Not Google. Apple has recently said that they want to hire someone with psychology and counseling backgrounds to help train Siri into helping other people who may have issues that they have not addressed yet. And normally these types of behaviors are lauded because I like the idea that mental health is becoming destigmatized and that we are addressing it more and we're taking it seriously, because in the past people would be like, get over it, just do this, just do that, which is not really a great way to handle anxiety or depression or any other mental health disorders. So this is a couple companies' attempts at this. However, some psychologists think these actually do harm. Simon Gilbody of University of York says Google's initiative has been reported positively and uncritically despite bypassing the usual checks and balances that exist for good reason. It is unlikely that their initiative will improve population health and may in fact do harm, because they've also said that the questionnaire could lead to some false positives.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of. So there's like two sides of this. One side is, you get a whole bunch of people on there taking this, quiz or seeing if they're depressed, and it could, because they're not getting like that personal interaction with someone who actually is a professional who knows what they're doing and who's able to assess them with just, you could lie to a computer, not lie, but you know what I mean? Like you can put things on the computer, like you don't understand yourself when you're, I don't know. It's hard to put into words. All I'm saying is a lot of mental problems could be self-diagnosed incorrectly, where like someone with schizophrenia could go on there and be like, oh, I have clinical depression, or I'm fine, and then if they had gone to a therapist, the therapist might have been able to uncover some of their personal problems.
I think sometimes, in many areas, we're kind of bad as humans at understanding ourselves and realizing problems and realizing positive things as well. So that is a major factor with it. There's also another issue, and that is with privacy. John Grohol, psychologist and administrator for PsychCentral.com, says Google is a technology and marketing company that collects people's data. It's not really clear about how they would use this information. I wouldn't want sensitive information like mental health to be in the hands of a marketing company.
That is a very good point.
That is a good point. Outside of the obvious from these psychologists.
And also the last thing I want is to be laying on a couch and going like, Suri, you know, this and that. And then all of a sudden it's like, it seems like you have issues. Like, tell me about your father. Like, that's the last thing I want. It's like for Suri to tell me that I have problems, like to like being like diagnosing me and like asking me. I'm like, this is really creepy. You know, a whole part of going to therapy and talking to therapists is to get that personal connection with someone to where you feel like you get that level of trust and this and that. And I don't know, maybe some people would prefer to talk to a computer, but I don't know.
Well, I think it's okay as a first step, which is, oh, maybe I should speak to someone else.
Maybe you should get a second opinion besides artificial intelligence.
Talk to a doctor about this instead of this thing that doesn't really know what I'm going through, and maybe I don't even know what I'm going through. But I think it's okay on that level. However, the other point we have about Google being a marketing company and collecting data is something that I would also be a little more wary about personally.
This is how we get Skynet, people. This is how we get Skynet.
Well, you may not necessarily have the data linked to your answers, and then they use anonymized data for sure. But they may also use this to help your user experience, i.e. serve you ads, which I might not really care for in general, but maybe that's a whole different ballgame than what we're talking about here. So I would say this is okay for a first step, but you should probably seek beyond Siri and seek beyond Google search if you want to improve your mental health. Audience, have you taken the test and what did it find? Do you agree? Please let us know at NerdAlertTYT on Twitter and Facebook.
So late last week, you might have seen the hashtag #StopBetsy on Twitter. Now this came after Betsy DeVos, who is our Department Secretary of Education, made an announcement that they were going to be rolling back some Obama-era guidance on Title IX and how to deal with sexual assault and sexual harassment on campuses. Now, a lot of her comments came in response to a letter that the Obama administration released to schools. It's called Dear Colleague. It was basically a long letter. I implore you to read it. That sort of outlined how schools should approach sexual assault, what sexual assault looks like, how teachers should be trained, how students should be trained, what sort of the process of involving the police and the courts and all of that looks like. So read that. But Betsy DeVos had some comments on it. And she said that she was concerned that the current policy denies due process to individuals accused. So she got a lot of backlash for this because obviously those that are accused in sexual assault and sexual harassment cases are oftentimes rapists or sexual abusers and things like that. And she said that they're already in the process of rolling back the Obama-era Title IX guidance. Now, you might recognize the name Title IX when it comes to like sports or something like that, right? Because Title IX basically says that you can't discriminate between genders when it comes to funding in schools. And so that it talks about sports and other education programs and things like that. But it also applies here to sexual assault and sexual abuse because not giving those who are victims of sexual abuse the proper sort of going through the motions and hearing them out and understanding what they've gone through is oftentimes discriminating for genders, right? Because women are oftentimes, or more often than not, the victims of sexual abuse. It's actually 1 in 5 women on a college campus is going to be the victim of sexual abuse, which is
a staggering
terrifying.
number.
Yeah, and oftentimes sexual abuse is like widely underreported, so that number is probably even higher.
Yeah.
But I want to mention out before we go into the rest of the story that men are also the victims of sexual abuse, and it's about 6%. Okay, so 6% of men are victims on college campuses as well. Now, Title IX, as I mentioned, is that federal law that prohibits discrimination based on sex, and so it includes this protection for sexual harassment, like I said. Now, in 2011, the Obama administration outlined the guidelines for schools on how to handle sexual assault allegations in the memo that's referred to as a Dear Colleague letter, okay? Now, the letter reminded schools of their legal obligation to address sexual violence amid concerns that schools were not taking the issue seriously enough and called on schools to step up investigations of reports. It also provided guidelines for investigations and hearings. And I think one of the most notable aspects of this Dear Colleague letter that I think Betsy DeVos is probably alluding to in her rollback is this part of going through on evidence, right? And so instead of needing 75% evidence, in most of these cases, it's about 50%, right? A 50% chance. Because in cases of sexual abuse and sexual assault, there's often not a lot of evidence because if you shower after or something like that, you're going to be missing some of the evidence. Or if you wait a few days because you're, concerned about retaliation, traumatized, whatever it may be, you won't have all of that evidence. But because the numbers are so staggering, and only about 2 to 10% of rape allegations are false, they say that you should sort of take those numbers into account in your proceedings. What do you think about this move from Betsy DeVos?
Well, like you mentioned, the numbers on of college campus sexual assault are just like absolutely staggering. It's like, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can just imagine like looking at these numbers and like sending your daughter off to college, and you're like, this is a 20% or at least, or maybe more chance of my little girl being, like sexually abused. Like that's like a crazy thing to think about, that we're, sending young girls to be, educated like at our most hallowed institutions in the country, and they were basically sending them to this like sexual assault meat grinder. It's absolutely crazy. It's very clear that it's a very serious problem that requires some sort of action. And it's just like the conservative hypocrisy on this, where all of a sudden they care about due process, which they never do in any, like whether it's in cases of terrorism or
drug offenses,
anything. They do not care about due process ever. But in this particular narrow case, they all of a sudden become like civil liberties heroes. So it's very clear that the Trump administration, shocking, and Betsy DeVos in particular, like are not acting in good faith. Like, right, they don't really care about the problem. They're just sticking up for part of their base, right? This sort of like men's rights group, activists and things like that. That being said, like it is very clear that it is such a almost like a wicked problem, right? I mean, because there's a reason why college campuses or colleges don't quote unquote take this issue seriously enough is because, like, imagine you're the first college that starts like seriously dealing with sexual assault. All of a sudden, like, your numbers look like, if you start investigating and you start to see all these cases of sexual assault, and all of a sudden, like, your college might get a reputation as being like the sexual assault college.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? So there's like a perverse incentive for them not to investigate, so that so it doesn't seem like it's actually going on.
Right. And that was the incentive then, but then after this Dear Colleague letter, basically the Obama administration said, we're not going to give you money, we're not going to do these things if you do not follow these guidelines. So then there was an incentive that almost flipped
it's almost
the
like
other
we
way.
need to see like instances of like reported sexual assault like uptick in a certain college campus as a good thing, if that makes sense.
Because more people are reporting and feel comfortable reporting.
That means that they're doing something right in terms of dealing with the problem. The other problem is that schools aren't, they're not criminal investigation centers or whatever. Like, they're not law enforcement. They don't have those tools necessarily. Like, so they probably may need some sort of funding program or something to develop the institutional ability to deal with something like this, because they clearly don't have it at this point. They're just not built for that, right? So it is a really thorny issue. Rolling back this is like obviously like the exact opposite thing of what they should be doing. They should be doing more to deal with the problem. They should be like looking into further government programs, new processes. I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation that requires a lot more to be done. I don't necessarily have the answers. I'm not a criminologist or an expert in how to investigate this, but like doing less and reverting back to the status quo is obviously like an unacceptable position. I mean, these numbers are just like too staggering.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and I think that maybe is the answer, right? Is keeping the Dear Colleague guidelines, but adding on to it, right? Like I think adding on aspects of education, right?
Yeah.
Where both genders are educated in what sexual assault and sexual abuse looks like, what to do if this happens to you, like maintaining evidence and things like that, and how to sort of deal with that. But also, like, we need to change the culture around masculinity and power dynamics, where this isn't sort of like, oh, he got drunk and whatever sort of thing, and we need to change that.
And I think that's a good point, because like everything that I've ever learned about sort of criminal justice would tell me that, you know, harsher punitive measures around a certain crime don't necessarily reduce the instances of that crime. Like there is something to be said about like just like overall justice, and just, you know, like, you know, a crime deserves, you know, some sort of punishment just as a fundamental sort of theoretical case.
Yeah, and a little bit of emotion too.
Right.
Yeah.
But if we're actually trying to sort of reduce the problem, whether it's drugs, whether it's murder, I mean, like, you know, we have the most punitive criminal justice system in the world, probably. Yet we don't have fewer murders. We don't have fewer instances of sexual violence. We don't have, you know, all these things. You know, they don't necessarily have an effect on the actual crime. The only way we can sort of have an effect to reduce crime is to programs of rehabilitation to reduce recidivism rates, and general, like you said, changing the culture, changing the you know, education, empowering women, empowering men. You know, like really educating men. I mean, you know, the perpetrators of this. I mean, obviously there's a, you know, million, you know, sort of degrees, and like there's like the full on just kind of like, you know, sinister behind the dumpster kind of rapist. But there's
like date rape.
There's probably some that maybe don't quite realize what they're doing. You know, if that makes sense. Like there's it runs the gamut, right? So we could probably eliminate a huge chunk by educating men. Right? Teaching them, like, you know, these certain things are not okay. Like, it's just not okay. You know, like, which maybe sometimes now they do think it's okay.
Right. And you know what I mean? Like, I think understanding what's not okay, right? And understanding what is defined as that is helpful. But also, like, saying, like, oh, if somebody's under the influence, they cannot give consent. Even if you're both under the influence, they cannot give consent. And I know that seems really frustrating to people, because they're like, wait, we were both drunk. But at the same time, like, there is a power dynamic that's intrinsic, unfortunately, in heterosexual rape. And so those things need to be taken into account.
Yeah.
And so we do need to sort of be educated on that. And I think if men and women alike are educated on that, then maybe we'd like reduce some of this, and of course changing the culture of masculinity,
obviously, like,
and how people exert their masculinity or their power, or whatever it may be, and feel like I get drunk and I eat a lot of nachos. Like, I'm not trying to pin anybody down, except for guacamole, but I think that's part of the, like, how I was, you know, brought up and things like that. And some people don't have that benefit, and so they may act out when under the influence, or with like, a partner or something like that, where they feel they have more freedom.
When you got to college, had you been around alcohol before in your life?
I had been around alcohol, and I was very educated. Like, my mom has told me since, like, I think I was like 9 years old, like, watch your drink, like, whatever. But I will tell you, as conscientious as I am about those sorts of things, and careful as I am, and not getting like blackout and things like that, like, I was refeeding college, and